Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto awakened power of the ultimate conquerors Haki and got married with Yamato? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Unfurling Will. The air in the land of iron was thin and sharp, each breath a sliver of ice in the lungs. Snow, thick and unrelenting, fell in a silent curtain, muffling the world in white. It did little to deaden the clang of steel or the hiss of chakra. On a plateau overlooking a frozen mountain pass, Team Yamato was fighting for its life. Their opponents were not mercenaries or missing nin driven by greed. They called themselves the Unchained Hand, a splinter group of shinobi who had abandoned their villages after the last Great War, convinced that the cage system was a failed experiment. They fought with the chilling coordination of true believers, led by a man named Kenzan, a mountain of a man whose scarred fists were wrapped in chakra-conductive iron. Sai, left flank, pin them down. Yamato's voice cut through the chaos, clear and commanding. From his position on a hastily erected pillar of wood, he directed his team like a master conductor. Below him, ink beasts, lions and great birds, rose from Sai's scroll. Their forms stark black against the snow, only to be torn apart by precise blasts of wind and lightning jutsu. Sakura moved like a phantom through the blizzard, her pink hair a single splash of color in the monochrome landscape. A flick of her wrist sent a kunai flying, deflecting a shuriken meant for Sai's back. She landed, her feet barely disturbing the snow, and slammed her chakra-infused fist into the ground. The earth buckled and split, throwing 3 enemy shinobi off balance. It was a momentary advantage, one they desperately needed. Naruto was a whirlwind of orange and black, a blur of motion at the heart of the enemy formation. He was a dervish, clones popping into existence around him, each armed with a nascent, swirling Rasengan. "You guys picked the wrong village to mess with," he yelled, his voice bright with defiance, though even he could feel the tide turning against them. The Unchained Hand numbered over 30, all Jonin level. Team Yamato had already taken out a dozen. But their own reserves were dwindling. Kenzan, the leader, hadn't even moved from his spot, watching with cold, analytical eyes. He had the patience of a glacier, and the crushing force to match. "Their formation is too tight," Yamato observed, weaving hand signs. Thick roots erupted from the frozen ground, snaking towards the enemy line, only to be severed by razor-sharp wind blades. "They're protecting their ranged specialists. Sakura, can you create another opening?" "On it," she yelled back, dodging a volley of Senbon needles. She gathered chakra into her fists, preparing for another earth-shattering blow. It was then that Kenzan finally moved. He didn't rush, he simply took a step forward, and the pressure on the battlefield multiplied tenfold. "Enough," his voice rumbled, a low bass that seemed to vibrate in their bones. He raised a hand, and 5 of his shinobi broke formation, executing a complex series of hand signs in perfect unison. "It's a combination jutsu," Yamato shouted, his eyes widening. "Everyone, defensive positions, now." He slammed his palms together, and a massive wooden dome, ribbed and thick, erupted around the team. The world outside vanished, replaced by the scent of earth and living wood. A moment later, a deafening roar enveloped them as a colossal wave of superheated lightning and concussive wind slammed into the dome. The wood groaned, splintering under the immense force. Steam hissed through cracks in the structure. Inside, the 4 Konoha shinobi braced themselves. The dome held, but barely. He used his grunts to power a large-scale jutsu. "Knowing we'd have to block it," Sai noted, his expression as placid as ever, though his knuckles were white where he gripped his brush. "A predictable but effective strategy. They are now converging on our position. Then we don't keep them waiting," Naruto declared, already forming a Rasengan. Yamato's hand signs were a blur. "Wait, Naruto, on my mark." Edome retracted back into the earth with a groan, revealing the enemy shinobi in a tight semicircle, their hands already forming the next seals. But Yamato was faster. Wood style. Deep forest emergence. The plateau became a writhing forest in an instant. Huge trees shot up from the ground, their branches twisting and lashing out like monstrous tentacles. The enemy formation broke as they were forced to leap and dodge the explosive growth of the forest. The trap had been sprung. Now, Yamato commanded. Naruto, Sakura, and Sai shot out in 3 different directions, weaving through the newly formed woodland. For a few precious moments, the tide turned. Naruto's clones overwhelmed isolated targets, Sakura's fists shattered both earth and bone, and Sai's inked creatures picked off shinobi from the air. But Kenzan was a veteran of 100 battles. He stood amidst the chaos, unmoved. "Reform," he ordered, his voice cutting through the din. "Sunder the field." His shinobi responded instantly. Fire jutsu turned Yamato's trees to ash, and lightning techniques tore through ink beasts. Kenzan himself moved, appearing directly in front of Sakura. She reacted with honed instinct, throwing a punch that could level a building. Kenzan didn't dodge. He met her fist with his own iron-clad one. The impact was sickening. A shockwave blasted snow and splintered wood outwards for 50 meters. Sakura cried out, not in pain, but in shock, as she was thrown back, her arm hanging at an unnatural angle. The force of the blow had not only neutralized her attack but had shattered the bones in her forearm despite her chakra reinforcement. "Sakura-chan!" Naruto screamed, his head snapping towards her fallen form. He saw her struggling to get up, her face pale. He saw Kenzan standing over her, raising his fist for a final lethal blow. Something inside Naruto snapped. A familiar, searing heat flooded his senses. The whispers of the 9 tails slithered in his mind, promising power, promising vengeance. Red, bubbling chakra began to leak from his pores, hissing as it touched the snow. His eyes bled from blue to a malevolent crimson. "Naruto, no!" Yamato's voice was sharp with alarm. He immediately began the hand signs for his sealing jutsu, the one designed to suppress the Jinchuriki's power. The wooden pillars on his back were already beginning to extend. But as the rage reached its zenith, as the Kyuubi's hatred threatened to consume him, something else rose from an even deeper well within him. It was not hot like the fox's chakra. It was not born of hatred. It was a cold, absolute certainty. A force of pure, undiluted will. The red chakra vanished. It didn't fade. It was snuffed out, like a candle in a hurricane. For a single, heartbeat-stretching moment, the world fell utterly silent. The blizzard seemed to hold its breath. Then, the wave hit. It had no sound, no color, no substance. It was a feeling, a pressure, a declaration of presence that slammed into the mind of every living thing on the plateau. Yamato felt it first, a crushing weight that forced the air from his lungs. The hand signs he was forming froze. His mind, honed by years of Anbu training, screamed at him. It wasn't chakra, it wasn't genjutsu, it was dominance, raw, terrifying authority that made every instinct he had shriek in submission. Sai, poised to draw a new beast, gasped. His brush slipped from his fingers. The world swam before his eyes, a dizzying vertigo gripping him as an invisible force tried to press his consciousness into oblivion. He gritted his teeth, his emotionless facade, cracking as he fought to remain upright. For the unchained hand, it was annihilation. The weaker-willed shinobi, the ones fighting on fanaticism alone, simply dropped. Their eyes rolled back into their heads, and they collapsed into the snow-like puppets whose strings had been cut, foam bubbling on their lips. More than 20 men fell without a single blow being struck. The stronger ones, the elite few, staggered. They clutched their heads, groaning as a pressure they couldn't comprehend tried to suffocate their spirits. They fell to their knees, weapons clattering uselessly onto the frozen ground. Kenzan, who had been about to execute Sakura, froze mid-strike. The pressure hit him like a physical blow. His breath hitched. His heart hammered against his ribs. He was a man who had faced down cage and lived. A man whose will had been forged in the crucible of war. But this was different. This wasn't a threat to his body. It was an assault on his very soul. It was the absolute, undeniable presence of a king. He slowly, shakily, lowered his fist. His gaze was locked on Naruto. Naruto stood 30 meters away, his body no longer cloaked in red chakra, but in an aura of pure, lent power that was visible only to the soul. His blue eyes were blazing with an intensity that had nothing to do with the Kyuubi. He wasn't enraged. He was focused. He was absolute. Kenzan's legs trembled. His formidable fighting spirit, the core of his being, was being eroded, ground down by the sheer force of Naruto's presence. A primal, long-forgotten fear bloomed in his chest. His body betrayed him, his knees buckled, and he fell into the snow, not from an attack, but from the utter annihilation of his will to fight. Naruto took a single step forward, and the pressure intensified. Kenzan choked, the world turning gray at the edges. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the pressure vanished. Naruto swayed on his feet, his eyes fluttering as the immense power receded. He gasped, falling to one knee, his chest heaving as if he had run 100 miles. He looked around at the devastation, at the field of unconscious bodies and the kneeling, trembling form of their leader, his face a mask of profound confusion. What was that? He whispered, his voice hoarse. The silence that followed was heavy and deep. The only sound was the soft fall of snow on the still forms of the fallen. Yamato was the first to move. He approached Naruto slowly, cautiously. The sealing jutsu was forgotten. Everything he thought he knew about Naruto Uzumaki, about the Kyuubi and its power, had been rendered obsolete in the last 30 seconds. He had been assigned to watch over a Jinchuriki, a living weapon. But what he had just witnessed was something else entirely. It wasn't the borrowed power of a caged monster. It was Naruto's own. Captain. Sai's voice was strained. He had managed to stay on his feet, but he was pale, a fine sheen of sweat on his brow. What happened? Yamato didn't have an answer. He reached Naruto's side and knelt, placing a hand on his shoulder. Naruto flinched but didn't pull away. Yamato felt no residual malevolent chakra, only the deep exhaustion of a boy who had just unleashed a god's power without knowing how. He looked over at Kenzan. The formidable leader of the Unchained Hand was staring into the snow, his eyes vacant, muttering the same word over and over again. Impossible. Impossible. He was a broken man. Yamato looked back at Naruto, his expression a complex mixture of awe, deep concern, and a dawning, profound respect. I don't know, he said, answering both Sai and himself. Let's get Sakura and get out of here. Our mission is over. The journey back to Konoha was a study in tension. They moved quickly, Yamato's wood jutsu creating makeshift shelters for them to rest in. He had set Sakura's arm, and she was stable, though quiet, her eyes often straying to Naruto with a new, unreadable expression. Sai sketched endlessly in his notebook, trying to capture the feeling of what he had experienced, but his ink creations were warped and strange. Naruto was the most withdrawn of all. He walked in silence, staring at his own hands as if they belonged to a stranger. He hadn't spoken a word about the incident, and no one had dared to ask. He could feel the shift in his team's dynamic. The easy camaraderie was gone, replaced by a careful, uncertain distance. He felt isolated, a freak once more, but for an entirely new reason. Yamato watched him constantly. His mind raced, trying to categorize the event. It defied all known principles of shinobi arts. It wasn't ninjutsu, taijutsu, or genjutsu. There was no chakra signature to analyze, no physical phenomenon to measure. It was a projection of pure will. The power to command, to dominate, to conquer. Without lifting a finger. It was the kind of power that legends were built on, and it resided inside the most unpredictable ninja in Konoha. When they finally passed through the gates of the village, the air of silent anxiety followed them all the way to the Hokage Tower. The Hokage's office was stifling. Tsunade sat behind her desk, her fingers steepled, her expression grim. On either side of her sat Homura and Kaharu, the village elders, their faces etched with deep lines of concern. And in the corner, half hidden in the shadows, stood Danzo Shimura, his one visible eye glittering with cold calculation. Yamato delivered his report with crisp, professional detachment. He detailed the mission, the enemy's strength, Sakura's injury, and finally, the event itself. He chose his words with extreme care. And at that moment, Uzumaki Naruto released a wave of pressure. It was non-physical and contained no detectable chakra. All hostiles with the exception of the leader were rendered unconscious. The leader, Kenzan, lost the will to fight and surrendered without further incident. Lost the will to fight. Kaharu repeated, her voice thin and reedy. What does that mean, Captain Yamato? Was it a genjutsu? Quote, no, Elder, Sakura spoke up, her arm in a sling. I have resistance to high-level genjutsu. This was different. It felt real. Like the air itself was trying to crush you. Tsunade looked at Naruto, who was standing rigidly in the center of the room, staring at the floor. Naruto, what did you do? Naruto's head snapped up. I don't know, he said, his voice raw with frustration. I saw Sakura-chan get hurt, and I got angry, and then, it just happened. It wasn't the fox. I know what that feels like. This was, me. Danzo stepped out of the shadows. A power you cannot explain or control, he said, his voice a soft, dangerous rasp. A power that can incapacitate dozens of Jonin-level shinobi in an instant. This is not a gift, Hokage-sama. It is an UN-regulated weapon of mass destruction residing in an already unstable vessel. What are you suggesting, Danzo? Tsunade's voice was dangerously low. The boy must be contained, Danzo stated flatly. The protocols of the Jinchuriki Control Act are clear. He should be placed under the watch of Root, where his new ability can be studied and, if necessary, neutralized for the security of this village. Homura nodded slowly. Danzo has a point, Tsunade. If word of this gets out, the other nations will see Konoha as harboring a weapon even more dangerous than the tailed beasts. It could shatter the fragile peace we've built. Naruto's fists clenched. I'm not a weapon. Silence, boy, Kaharu snapped. Tsunade slammed her hand on the desk, the sound echoing like a gunshot. The entire room fell silent. Her eyes, burning with furious conviction, were locked on Danzo. You will not touch him, Danzo. Root will have no part in this. An unknown power is not something to be feared and suppressed, it is something to be understood. To chain him up like an animal would be the act of a coward, not a leader. She stood, her presence filling the room, dwarfing the elders and forcing Danzo to take a half step back. My decision is final, Captain Yamato, she said, her gaze shifting to him. Your mission parameters have changed. Effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties as a Kyuubi suppressor. Yamato's eyes widened slightly. Your new, permanent assignment is to be Naruto Uzumaki's partner. You will stick with him, train with him, and help him understand and master this power. You are not his warden. You are his guide. You will be assigned secured quarters with advanced training facilities where you can work without interruption. You will report only to me. Is that understood? Yamato straightened, a new sense of purpose settling over him. He saw the flash of fury in Danzo's eye, the uncertainty on the elders' faces, and the flicker of hope in Naruto's. Crystal clear, Hokage-sama. Good, Tsunade said, sitting back down. The rest of you are dismissed. One by one, they filed out, leaving only Tsunade, Naruto, and Yamato. The tension in the room eased, but a new, more personal uncertainty took its place. Don't let them get to you, Naruto, Tsunade said, her voice softer now. They're old and they fear what they don't understand. But I believe in you. And I'm trusting you, Yamato. He's in your hands. Quote, Yamato nodded once. I will not fail you. The assigned quarters were in a secure block beneath the Hokage monument, a place usually reserved for housing H-value guests or for sensitive interrogations. The living area was spacious but sterile, furnished with functional, impersonal pieces. It felt less like a home and more like a gilded cage. They stood in the center of the room. The silence stretching between them, thick and awkward. The dynamic that had defined their relationship for years, that of a jailer and his charge, had been officially dissolved an hour ago. Neither of them knew what was supposed to replace it. Naruto broke the silence first, his voice quiet. Are you afraid of me, Captain? Yamato turned to face him fully. He studied the boy. No, the young man, in front of him. He saw the flicker of his old defiance warring with a new, heavy uncertainty in his blue eyes. He thought of the suffocating, malevolent chakra of the Nine Tails. A force of pure destruction he had faced many times. He remembered the feeling of its hatred, its rage. Then he thought of the overwhelming, absolute pressure on that snowy plateau. It had been terrifying, yes. But it hadn't been malicious. It had simply been powerful. No, Yamato said, his voice calm and steady, a grounding anchor in Naruto's turbulent emotions. I'm not afraid of you, Naruto. I've seen the Kyuubi's power. That was hatred. What I saw in the Land of Iron, that was just you. For the first time since the battle, the tension in Naruto's shoulders eased. He looked up, meeting Yamato's gaze, and offered a small, hesitant smile. It wasn't his usual wide, sunny grin, but it was a start. A foundation. In the Hokage's office, long after the sun had set, Tsunade was rubbing her temples. A half-empty bottle of sake on her desk. Shizune entered quietly, placing a fresh stack of mission reports on the corner of the desk. "Try to get some rest, Lady Tsunade," she said softly. "Rest can wait," the Hokage grumbled. Picking up the top folder, she scanned it, then the next. Her eyes paused on a third, a minor report from a border watch team stationed near the northern mountains. "What's this?" "Oh," Shizune said, glancing at the file. "A strange case from Outpost 3B. They sent a patrol to a small, self-sufficient village in the valleys, a place called Odayaka, for a routine trade exchange. They found the village quiet. The people were all alive and well, but completely listless. No one was working the fields, the market was empty. They just wander around, placid and unresponsive. The patrol suspected a gas leak or a waterborne toxin, but their tests came up negative. It's been flagged for a low-priority investigation." Tsunade grunted, her mind still preoccupied with Naruto. A whole village gets lazy at the same time. Strange. Put it on the docket for next week. Right now, I have a feeling we have bigger problems to worry about. She put the folder aside, unaware that the silent, creeping threat and the explosive, world-shaking one were two sides of the same coming storm. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. Echoes in the silence. The training ground was a vast, gray, featureless cube of reinforced concrete and ceiling arrays, deep beneath the bedrock of Konoha. It was a sterile, silent world, designed to contain the unimaginable. For 3 days, it had been Naruto's new home, and his personal prison of frustration. "It's no use," he yelled, the sound swallowed by the insulated walls. He was sitting cross-legged in the center of the room, sweat beading on his brow. His eyes screwed shut in concentration. I can't find the switch." Across from him, Yamato sat calmly on a wooden bench he had created, observing with unnerving patience. "There is no switch, Naruto. The Hokage's report from the Land of Iron, my own observations, everything suggests the power didn't respond to your anger. It responded to your certainty. You saw your friend in mortal danger, and your will to protect her became an absolute. You didn't hope to save her, you decided to. But that's just it." Naruto threw his hands up, opening his eyes. "I'm always decided. I decided I'm gonna be Hokage. But the room isn't shaking. I decided I want ramen for dinner, but a bowl isn't popping into my hand." Yamato allowed a small, wry smile to touch his lips. "Perhaps your desire for ramen lacks a certain, existential weight." He stood and walked toward Naruto. "You're trying to force it, like a new ninjutsu. Stop thinking of it as a tool you wield. Think of it as you. It's the weight of your own presence in the world. You don't use it. You are it. Try something else. Forget about making things happen. Just listen." "Listen to what?" "The concrete." Naruto grumbled, but he respected Yamato's calm logic. He slumped, letting out a long breath and closing his eyes again. "Don't use your chakra," Yamato instructed, his voice soft. "Don't try to sense me in the way a sensor nin would. Just feel. Acknowledge my presence. Where am I?" Naruto focused. He shut down the familiar hum of his own chakra, the faint thrum of the 9 tails deep within him. He pushed past the sounds of his own breathing, his own heartbeat. He reached for the empty space in front of him, and for a long moment, there was nothing. Then, a sensation. It wasn't a sound or a shape, but a feeling, a concept given form in his mind. It was solid, unflappable, a deep, quiet strength that was rooted in the very earth. It felt like a great, ancient tree, its branches broad and its roots unshakable. "You're there," Naruto whispered, pointing directly at Yamato's chest. "You feel calm, steady." He opened his eyes. Yamato was looking at him with an expression of intense, scholarly fascination. "Extraordinary. You felt my will, my nature." Before Naruto could process this, Yamato wove a simple hand sign. A small, perfect seedling sprouted from the concrete floor, its twin leaves unfurling. "Now, try again. Feel this." Naruto closed his eyes and focused on the seedling. This time, the feeling was different. It was a tiny, faint flicker. A spark of life, a fragile, desperate desire to grow. To reach for a sun it had never seen. It was a whisper compared to the deep resonance of Yamato. It's small, Naruto said, amazed. But it wants to live. Really, really badly. He opened his eyes again, a wide, genuine grin finally breaking through his frustration. I get it. It's like everyone. Everything has its own signature. Its own feeling. Yamato nodded, a look of profound satisfaction on his face. And a power that can feel the will of others is far more valuable than one that can only crush it. This is your real breakthrough, Naruto. Their training was interrupted by the hiss of the pneumatic door to the training ground. Tsunade stood in the doorway, her expression serious. Pack your gear. Both of you. You have a mission. As they leapt through the canopy of the great forests of the Land of Fire. A new dynamic settled between them. The journey was no longer marked by the tense silence of a guard and his ward. It was easier, collaborative. Naruto, buzzing with his new discovery, practiced his Haki sense constantly. Whoa, there's a big one over there. He'd exclaim, pointing to the west. Feels angry and hungry. A moment later, Yamato would spot a large bear foraging by a stream. Your range is impressive. Can you feel its intent? Yeah, it's not just a person's will, it's everything, Naruto mused, concentrating. The bear feels like a hot coal. The trees all feel sleepy, I guess. Like they're all part of one big, slow dream. And you still feel like a tree, Captain. But more awake. Call me Tenzo, Yamato said, the name dropping easily into the space between them as they soared from one branch to the next. It was his given name, the one from before the Anbu, before the codenames and the masks. Captain Yamato is a role. Tenzo is a person. It's important you feel the difference. Naruto glanced at him, surprised and pleased. Okay, Tenzo. He tested the name out. It felt right. It felt like the steady presence he could now sense with his eyes closed. For the first time, Yamato, Tenzo, saw a path forward that wasn't dictated by orders or the legacy of the first Hokage's cells. He was an explorer, charting the landscape of a power that could reshape the world. And his guide was the most unpredictable person he had ever met. It was a disquieting, but exhilarating, feeling. They traveled north for 2 days, climbing into the colder, thinner air of the mountains. The mission brief had been sparse. Investigate the village of Odayaka, determine the cause of the populace's sudden, shared lethargy, and render aid if possible. Tsunade had called it a field test. To Naruto, it felt like the first real mission he had ever been on where his primary tool wasn't a Rasengan, but this strange, new sense. They crested the final ridge overlooking the valley of Odayaka in the late afternoon. The village was nestled by a calm, gray lake, smoke curling lazily from a few chimneys. From a distance, it looked peaceful. It was only when they got closer that the profound wrongness of the place began to assert itself. It was the silence. There was no sound of children playing. No ring of a blacksmith's hammer. No chatter from an open-air market. The only noise was the gentle lapping of the lake and the sigh of the wind through the pines. It was the silence of a graveyard, but one where the dead were still walking. As they entered the village proper, the feeling intensified. A woman was sweeping her porch, her movements slow and mechanical, her eyes utterly vacant. A man sat on a bench, staring at nothing, his fishing pole lying untouched beside him. 2 children were sitting in the middle of the street, listlessly pushing a wooden toy back and forth without a single sound of joy or frustration. This is creepy, Naruto whispered, his cheerful demeanor gone, replaced by a cold knot of dread in his stomach. Tenzo's face was a mask of grim professionalism. Stay alert. There are no visible signs of a struggle or a disease. He paused, looking at Naruto. What do you feel? Naruto closed his eyes, focusing his Haki. He had felt the bright, chaotic sparks of will in Konoha, the hot coal of the bear, the sleepy dream of the forest. Here, there was almost nothing. It was a vacuum. He could feel the people, but their wills, their life signatures, were like the last embers of a dying fire, so faint they were almost invisible. A cold, hollow emptiness permeated the entire valley. They're empty, Naruto said, his voice strained. There's nothing inside them. It's like their spirit has been scooped out. The description sent a chill down Tenzo's spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. This was no plague or poison. This was something far more sinister. The report mentioned the patrol suspected the water source, Tenzo said, his voice low. The well is in the center of the village. Let's start there. They moved through the silent streets, the blank stares of the villagers following them with a terrifying lack of curiosity. The well was a simple stone structure in the middle of a small plaza. It looked completely normal. Tenzo produced a sample vial and began to collect some of the water. Naruto extended his sense towards the well, trying to feel the water itself. It felt like the rest of the village, cold, dead, and empty. But as he focused deeper, he felt something else. A faint, wrong-feeling residue. It was a whisper of the same emptiness, but more concentrated. He knelt, placing his hand on the stone lip of the well. Something's wrong with this water, he confirmed. It feels tainted. It was then that the ambush was sprung. There was no battle cry, no sudden explosion. Just silent, coordinated movement from 3 directions. 3 shinobi, wearing the simple flak jackets of the village guard, dropped from the surrounding rooftops. They landed without a sound, their movements fluid and perfectly synchronized as they drew their kunai. Naruto, look out, Tenzo yelled, shoving him aside as he erected a wall of wood from the ground. A volley of shuriken embedded themselves in the timber. Naruto rolled and came up in a crouch. Finally, someone who wants to talk, he said, a relieved grin on his face. He charged one of the shinobi. Hey, what's going on here? Why is everyone acting like a bunch of zombies? The shinobi didn't answer. His eyes were as vacant as the other villagers. But his movements were sharp and deadly. He met Naruto's charge with a precise, economical block, his body moving with an efficiency that bordered on inhuman. Naruto disengaged, his grin fading. Not much of a talker, huh? The 3 attackers moved as one, their taijutsu a seamless web of attacks. One would strike high, forcing a block, while another swept low, and the third went for a flanking strike. Tenzo and Naruto were pushed onto the defensive, their own superb teamwork being countered by the eerie, hive-mind precision of their opponents. There's no wasted movement, Tenzo noted, blocking a kunai strike with a wooden vambrace that grew from his arm. They're not predicting us. They're simply reacting with perfect logic. Naruto created 2 shadow clones, and the fight became a chaotic 6-on-3 brawl. But the emotionless shinobi were unfazed. They dispatched the clones with ruthless, targeted strikes, never falling for a feint or a misdirection. Rasengan, Naruto yelled, forming the swirling sphere of chakra in his palm and driving it forward. His target didn't even flinch. At the last possible second, the man dropped into a near-impossible acrobatic arch. The Rasengan grazing his flak jacket as he slid beneath the attack, coming up with a kunai aimed at Naruto's kidney. Tenzo's wooden tendrils shot out, wrapping around the man's arm and yanking him back. They don't feel fear, Naruto. Your usual tactics won't work. Naruto leapt back, panting. Tenzo was right. He fought with his heart, with unpredictability and passion. He rattled his enemies, got under their skin. But these things had no skin to get under. They were puppets of flesh and bone. As the 3 shinobi advanced again, their steps in perfect, unnerving unison, Naruto remembered Tenzo's words from the training yard. Stop thinking of it as a tool you wield. You are it. He stopped trying to outfight them. He stopped trying to outthink them. He planted his feet, took a deep breath, and focused inward, not on anger, but on a single, absolute certainty: you will not pass. He didn't unleash the massive, crushing wave from the land of iron. Instead, he let out a focused, sharp pulse of his will. A silent, invisible shout. It wasn't strong enough to render them unconscious, but the effect was instantaneous. The 3 shinobi faltered. For a single, critical second, their perfect synchronization shattered. One of them stumbled, another shook his head as if trying to clear away a fog. Their hive mind had been momentarily disrupted. That was all the opening Naruto needed. He didn't reach for a Rasengan. He didn't create any clones. He coated his fists in a thin, invisible sheath of his own willpower. He moved, his taijutsu no longer just a physical assault. Each blow he landed felt different. It wasn't just about the force of impact. When his Haki-infused fist struck one of the shinobi's shoulders, the man didn't just recoil from the pain, his entire body seemed to short-circuit. His limbs jerking erratically before he collapsed, unconscious. Naruto spun, deflecting a blow from the second and striking him in the solar plexus. The man's vacant eyes widened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of confused humanity returning before he, too, crumpled to the ground. The third attacker was dispatched by Tenzo, who, seeing Naruto's success, had encased him in a wooden prison. The plaza fell silent once more. Naruto stood over the unconscious forms, his chest rising and falling. He looked at his fists, a new, dawning understanding on his face. It wasn't just a pressure wave. It could be focused. It could be wielded. That night, they took shelter in the abandoned home of the village headman. It was immaculate but felt unused, like a museum piece. Tenzo analyzed the water sample with a portable sealing scroll containing a field analysis kit, but the results were baffling. No toxins, no chakra, no known biological agents, he said, frustration clear in his voice. It's just water. But what Naruto felt, what we saw, that can't be denied. They sat in the quiet living room, the only light from a single candle flame that cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. The silence of the village pressed in on them. Fighting them, it was horrible, Naruto said quietly, breaking the stillness. He was staring into the candle flame, his arms wrapped around his knees. It was worse than fighting someone who wants to kill you. At least you know they're in there. Those guys, there was nothing inside. Just an empty house. Tenzo looked at him, at the troubled expression on the face of the young man who was supposed to be a living weapon. He saw not a Jinchuriki, but a deeply empathetic person horrified by the absence of the human spirit. And in that, he found an unexpected and painful point of connection. I know what that's like, Tenzo said, his voice barely a whisper. To feel like there's nothing inside. Naruto looked up, his full attention on him. Tenzo looked away, at the shadows on the wall. He rarely spoke of his past. It was a sealed part of his soul, locked away with the codenames and the blood. But sitting here, in this silent village of empty people, next to the one person who could literally feel the wills of others, the words began to surface. When I was a child, he began, his voice low and steady, I wasn't a person. I was an experiment. Subject number 60, of Orochimaru's attempt to replicate the first Hokage's power. The others, 59 before me, they all died. He fell silent for a moment, the memory a cold weight. I didn't have a name. I didn't have a will of my own. I was just a thing in a tank. He would run tests, alter my body, trying to force Hashirama-sama's cells to bond with mine. When I wasn't being tested, I was kept in the dark. The only will I knew was his ambition, his desire. Naruto listened, his expression somber, his usual boisterous energy completely absent. He didn't interrupt, he just listened. When I was finally rescued, Tenzo continued, I was given a place in the ANBU. They gave me a codename, Kino, then Tenzo. They gave me orders, a purpose, but it was always someone else's will. Danzo's will, the Hokage's will. For a long time, I wondered if there was anything inside me that was truly my own. He finally turned to look at Naruto, his gaze direct and vulnerable. So I understand your horror, Naruto. To see a person who is just an empty shell, it's a fate worse than death. For a long moment, Naruto was silent. He didn't offer empty platitudes or a loud declaration that everything would be okay. He simply absorbed the weight of Tenzo's confession. He reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder, a simple, solid gesture of connection. You're not an experiment, Tenzo, Naruto said, his voice quiet but firm, imbued with the same certainty he'd found in the fight. You're you. The quiet sincerity of the words, the simple acceptance, struck Tenzo more deeply than any grand speech could have. A bond, forged not in the heat of battle, but in the quiet sharing of scars, settled between them, solid and real. As the first gray light of dawn filtered through the dusty window, they prepared to leave. Naruto walked back to the well one last time. He closed his eyes, extending his Haki sense, pushing it deeper this time, past the tainted emptiness of the water. He was looking for a source, a signal, and then he found it. It was incredibly faint, almost imperceptible, like a single strand of spider's silk in a vast darkness. A thread of that same cold, hollow energy, leading away from the well, away from the village, stretching north, deeper into the uninhabited, frozen peaks of the northern mountains. He opened his eyes, a grim look of determination on his face. He looked at Tenzo. "It's not just the village," he said. "This is coming from somewhere else. And I think we have a trail." Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The King's Decree. The trail of Ents had led them deeper into the northern mountains, a desolate expanse of wind-scoured rock and ice. Naruto and Tenzo had followed the faint, metaphysical thread for another day, the sense of wrongness growing with every step, only to find the trail abruptly end at a collapsed cave entrance. The rockfall was ancient, sealed by centuries of ice. Whatever the source had been, it was now buried beyond their reach. Frustrated and with more questions than answers, they had no choice but to turn back. Their return to Konoha was met not with a debriefing, but with an armed Anbu escort. The masked Hinobi appeared on the path as they neared the village gates, their posture rigid, their chakra signatures tense. They didn't offer a greeting, only a single, curt command. "The Hokage requires your presence. Immediately." The walk through the village was unnerving. People stared, their expressions a mixture of awe and fear. Whispers followed them like a rustling wind. The story of the Land of Iron had not been contained. It had bled out, twisting and distorting with every telling, until Naruto was no longer a hero, but a living cataclysm, a boy who could break armies with a glare. The Hokage's office was a pressure cooker. Tsunade stood by the great window overlooking the village, her back to the room. The air was thick with the smoke from Danzo's pipe and the acidic tension emanating from the two village elders. Homura and Kaharu, who stood stiffly to the side. "Report," Tsunade said, without turning. Tenzo stepped forward, delivering a concise summary of their findings in Odayaka, the soulless populace, the emotionless shinobi, the tainted well, and the now inaccessible source of the phenomenon. When he finished, it was Danzo who spoke, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. "A mist. Riotous power that erases the will of its victims. How convenient that this emerges just as Naruto Uzumaki develops a power that imposes his own. One could almost see it as a balancing act of nature." "Get to the point, Danzo," Tsunade growled, finally turning. Her face was etched with exhaustion and fury. "The point, Hokage-sama," Danzo said smoothly, "is that the world is no longer debating the existence of this power. They are reacting to it. I have received intelligence from our sources in Iwagakure and Kumogakure. The Tsuchikage and the Raikage have invoked the Gokage Summit Treaty. They are calling for an emergency session." Naruto's stomach tightened. "What for?" Kaharu answered, her voice sharp with disapproval. "For you, boy. They are calling you Konoha's person of mass destruction. They are demanding your power be sealed, or that you be handed over to a joint international authority for containment. They want to put me on a leash," Naruto said, his voice flat. "They want to dissect you." Danzo corrected him coldly. "They fear a second Hashirama Senju, a single individual with the power to unilaterally end any conflict. They fear Konoha will use you to upset the balance of power. And frankly, their fear is not entirely unwarranted." "That's enough, Danzo." Tsunade slammed her hand on the windowsill, cracking the stone. "You will not sow dissent in my office." She locked eyes with Naruto, and he saw a flicker of desperation beneath her formidable will. "The summit is in 3 days. In the Land of Iron. They have requested your presence." "It's not a request. I need you there, Naruto. This is not a situation that can be solved with a Rasengan. This is politics. It's a battle of words and perception." Naruto looked at the faces in the room. The elders, fear, Danzo's ambition, Tsunade's embattled hope. He felt the whispers of the villagers, the fear of the other nations. It was a cage of expectations and terror, and it was closing in on him. He felt Tenzo's steady, tree-like presence behind him. An unspoken anchor. He took a deep breath. "Okay," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I'll go." That evening, their secure quarters felt more like a command center. A large map of the continent was spread on the central table. Shikamaru Nara was leaning over it, his hands in his pockets, his expression one of intense, weary concentration. He had been summoned by Tsunade to be their strategist. "It's a real drag," Shikamaru sighed, tapping a finger on Kumogakure. The Raikage, is all muscle and momentum. He sees a threat, he tries to smash it. Arguing with him is like trying to reason with a thunderstorm. He'll be your biggest obstacle. He shifted his finger to Iwagakure. Onoki, the Tsuchikage, is the opposite. He's old, stubborn, and cynical. He's seen too many wars to believe in anything like a benevolent super weapon. He'll try to dismantle you with words, poke holes in your resolve, and frame you as a naive child with a god's power. He's more dangerous than What about the Mizukage and Kazekage? Tenzo asked, his arms crossed as he stood beside Naruto. Mei Terumi is a pragmatist. She'll wait to see who has the stronger position before committing, Shikamaru explained. Gaara is your only certain ally. But his influence is limited. Suna is still recovering its strength. His support will be seen as personal friendship, not sound political policy. Naruto was quiet, listening to the tactical breakdown. The old Naruto would have been bouncing off the walls, declaring he'd just talk some sense into them. But Otayaka had changed him. The fight with the empty shinobi, the quiet confession from Tenzo, it had all added a new weight to his understanding of the world. So they're all afraid, Naruto said, looking at the map not as a collection of villages, but as a web of fear. That's the long and short of it, Shikamaru agreed. So, what's the plan? A show of force, a promise of restraint. It's a troublesome situation. Every option has a downside. Naruto looked at Tenzo, whose expression was calm and watchful. Then he looked back at the map. What if we don't give them any of those options? He said slowly. What if we don't play their game? Shikamaru raised an eyebrow. What game are you thinking of? The one where they get to decide what I am, Naruto said, his voice gaining a hard edge of certainty. They want to debate whether I'm a weapon or a threat or a tool. I'm not going to argue with them. I'm not going to threaten them, and I'm not going to beg. I'm just going to tell them what's what. Shikamaru stared at him for a long moment. A slow, appreciative smile spreading across his face. Now that is a strategy I can work with. It's either going to be a stroke of genius or get us all killed. What a drag. The summit hall in the Land of Iron was a grand, austere chamber of dark wood and polished steel. A single, massive circular table dominated the room, the 5 banners of the Great Shinobi villages hanging behind 5 ornate chairs. The air was cold and heavy with unspoken hostility. The 4th Raikage, sat with his massive arms crossed, his face a thunderous mask of impatience. Beside him, Onoki, the 3rd Tsuchikage, floated just above his chair, looking deceptively frail, his eyes sharp with ancient cunning. Mei Terumi, the 5th Mizukage, offered a polite, plastic smile that didn't reach her eyes. Gaara, the 5th Kazekage, was as still and silent as a statue, his presence a pool of calm in the turbulent room. Tsunade represented Konoha, her knuckles white where she gripped the arms of her chair. Their bodyguards stood behind them. Darui and C for Kumo, Akatsuchi and Kuretsuchi for Iwa, Chojuro and Ao for Kiri, and Conqueror and Tamari for Suna. Let us dispense with the pleasantries. The Raikage's voice boomed, making the very air vibrate. We are here to discuss the existential threat Konoha has allowed to fester. We are here to discuss Naruto Uzumaki. Onoki stroked his beard. Threat. I see it as an opportunity, Raikage Dono. An opportunity to finally put an end to the charade of balance. Konoha has a new bomb. The question is not if they will use it, but when. His words were silk, but they carried the venom of a viper. My shinobi is not a bomb, Tsunade retorted, her voice dangerously level. He leveled an entire platoon of elite samurai without touching them. The Raikage slammed his fist on the table, cracking the polished surface. Do not insult our intelligence, Tsunade. What is to stop him from marching into my village and bringing it to its knees? Only his whim, I should think, Onoki added with a dry chuckle. It was into this maelstrom of accusation and fear that the doors to the chamber opened. Naruto walked in, flanked by Tenzo. He wore his standard mission attire, no formal robes, no ceremony. He looked like what he was, a shinobi, not a politician. But his presence, even before he used his power, shifted the very atmosphere of the room. He moved with a quiet confidence that was entirely new. Danzo, who was part of Konoha's delegation, stepped forward to intercept him, likely to try and control the narrative. Naruto, allow me to handle the introductions. That won't be necessary, Danzo, Naruto said, his voice calm but carrying an authority that made the elder pause. He walked past him, Tenzo taking up a position just behind his shoulder, a silent, immovable guard. Naruto didn't go to Konoha's section of the table. He walked to the very center of the circle, standing alone, visible to all five kage. You wanted to talk about me, Naruto began. His voice clear and steady, filling the cavernous hall. So let's talk. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. When he opened them, the change happened. He didn't shout. He didn't release a crushing wave. He simply was. An immense, silent pressure descended upon the room. It was not a physical force, but a metaphysical one. The candles in the steel sconces guttered as if in a strong wind. Though the air was perfectly still, the hardened Jonin acting as bodyguards felt a cold sweat break out on their skin. Their hands twitched towards their weapons, but their limbs suddenly felt heavy. Sluggish, as if they were moving through deep water. The cage felt it most acutely. It was a weight on their very being. The Raikage felt his boiling rage cool to a simmer. The sheer force of his personality being dwarfed by something far greater. Onoki, for the first time in 50 years, felt like a small man, his immense pride and experience feeling brittle and insignificant. Mei felt her diplomatic composure crack, a primal instinct screaming at her that she was in the presence of a predator of the highest order. Even Gaara felt it, his sand stirring restlessly in its gourd. Not in aggression, but in a strange, resonant deference. Naruto's blue eyes swept over each of them, and none of them could meet his gaze for long. You're afraid, he stated, not as an accusation, but as a simple fact. You're afraid that I'll become another Madara, another Hashirama, another man with the power to burn your villages to the ground. You're afraid Konoha will use me to conquer you. He let the words hang in the heavy air. You're right to be afraid of the power, he continued, his voice unwavering. But you are asking the wrong questions. You ask, what will Konoha do with him? You ask, how can we control him? He took a slow step forward, and the pressure in the room intensified. Here is the answer. No one controls me. This power is not Konoha's. It's not a tool for my village, or a weapon for any nation. It is mine. My will is my own. He looked directly at the Raikage. You ask what is stopping me from marching into your village. The answer is simple. I don't want to. Your people are not my enemy. He turned his gaze to the Tsuchikage. You think this is a game of power, a bomb waiting to go off. You're wrong. This is a responsibility, one I never asked for, but one I will not run from. Finally, he addressed them all, his voice resonating with the silent, immense force of his Haki. I have one goal, to protect my friends and to build a world where we don't have to gather in rooms like this, planning for the next war. If you stand with me in that goal, you are my ally. If you stand against it, if you threaten the people I see about, then you will see what this power can really do. He wasn't threatening them. He was making a promise. A decree. The sheer, unshakable conviction behind his words was more terrifying than any army. I will not be your weapon, Naruto said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more powerful than a shout. I will not be your deterrent. And I will not be your enemy, unless you give me no other choice. That is my declaration. Accept it, or don't. It doesn't matter. It will not change. With that, the pressure lifted. The air rushed back into the room, and the bodyguards gasped as if surfacing from a great depth. The candles burned brightly once more. Naruto stood there, just a boy in an orange jacket again, but everyone in the room knew they had just witnessed something monumental. They had just been addressed not by a shinobi, but by a king. A profound silence held the room captive. The Raikage was pale, his bravado utterly gone. Onoki was staring at Naruto, his cynical mask shattered, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. It was Gaara who broke the silence. He stood up, his voice quiet but carrying across the hall. I have known Naruto Uzumaki for years. I have seen the strength of his will and the quality of his heart. Suna places its trust in him. He bowed his head slightly toward Naruto, a gesture of profound respect from one cage to another. That single act broke the spell. The summit was, for all intents and purposes, over. There was nothing left to debate. Naruto had not won an argument. He had simply rendered it irrelevant. Back in their quarters in Konoha, the adrenaline of the confrontation had faded, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. Naruto collapsed onto a couch, throwing an arm over his eyes. Tenzo stood by the window, looking out at the village lights. A cup of tea steaming in his hands. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The victory at the summit felt different from any battle Naruto had ever won. There was no cheering crowd, no vanquished foe. Just a quiet, heavy understanding. You were incredible, Tenzo said finally, his back still to Naruto. His voice was filled with a genuine, unvarnished awe. I served under the third Hokage. I've taken orders directly from Tsunade-sama. I have never, ever seen anyone command a room like that. Not with jutsu, not with threats, but just by being themselves. Naruto lowered his arm, looking at Tenzo's back. I was terrified, he admitted quietly. My knees were shaking the whole time. Tenzo turned, a rare, soft smile on his face. I know, I could feel it, but I could also feel your resolve. It was like a mountain. The fear was just a few pebbles at its base. He walked over and handed Naruto the cup of tea. Their fingers brushed, a small, simple contact that felt grounding. Thank you for being there, Naruto said, taking the cup. I couldn't have done it if you weren't standing behind me. You were the one who spoke, Naruto, Tenzo replied, sitting in a chair across from him. I was just a witness. No, Naruto insisted, looking him in the eye. You were my anchor. Knowing you were there, steady, it made me feel like I could face them. A comfortable silence settled between them, no longer awkward or uncertain. They had faced a silent, creeping horror in Odayaka. They had faced the leaders of the world. And they had done it together. Their mission had been to understand Naruto's power, but it had become something more. They were forging a partnership that transcended orders and ranks, built on shared scars and a quiet, mutual respect that was beginning to feel a great deal like something else entirely. In a world of kings and gods, they had found their footing, together. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. A bond forged in wood and will. A fragile peace had settled over Konoha in the weeks following the Gokage summit. Naruto's declaration had sent a shockwave through the shinobi world, and the great powers seemed to be holding their collective breath. Uncertain how to proceed, for Naruto and Tenzo, it meant a return to their quiet routine of training, a rhythm that now felt less like a mission and more like a life. The sterile, secure quarters had slowly started to feel like a home, marked by the addition of a small, resilient bonsai tree on the windowsill and the constant, comforting scent of Tenzo's tea. Naruto's control over his Haki was growing exponentially. He could now extend his senses over the entire village, a silent, invisible guardian. He could feel the bright, unwavering flame of Tsunade's will in the Hokage Tower, the lazy, brilliant flicker of Shikamaru's mind, and the steady, deep-rooted presence of Tenzo beside him, an anchor in a sea of souls. He was learning to modulate the output, from a gentle PR escher that could nudge a sparring partner off balance to a focused beam that could instill a fleeting moment of doubt in an opponent. He was becoming a scalpel where he had once been a sledgehammer. Their new peace was interrupted by the arrival of a formal delegation from Kurigakure, led by the stoic, blue-haired Ao. Bypassing the usual diplomatic channels with the elders, they delivered a sealed scroll directly to Naruto. Inside the Hokage's office, Tsunade read the Mizukage's message aloud. Her tone was grim. A faction of rebels, calling themselves the Cult of Serenity, has gained significant power in the outer archipelagos. They are led by a charismatic figure named Yasuga. He preaches a gospel of tranquility, promising to liberate the people of the land of water from the tyranny of emotion that led to the bloody civil wars of our past. Naruto and Tenzo exchanged a look of immediate, cold understanding. Empty people, Naruto said, the words tasting like ash. It's Odayaka all over again. Worse, Tsunade confirmed, tapping the scroll. Yasuga is not just creating listless villages. He is building an army. His followers fight with the same eerie coordination you described, but they are aggressive, efficient, and utterly without fear. Mei believes this is a direct threat to her government and the stability of the entire region. She is formally requesting your assistance, Naruto. Not as a Konoha asset, But as the one person who has faced this specific threat, Tenzo's expression was hard. This Yasuga is an agent of the same force we encountered. This isn't a rebellion, it's an invasion of the mind. He looked at Naruto, his voice firm. It's a threat we must answer. Naruto nodded, his gaze fixed on the map. The tendril of silence he had felt leading from Otayaka may have been buried. But its source was clearly still active, its poison spreading through new veins. Tell the Mizukage we're on our way. The journey to the land of water was by sea, on a high-speed vessel provided by Kurigakure. For days, they were surrounded by the endless, rolling expanse of the ocean. The vastness of it all should have been calming, but the nature of their mission cast a pall over the tranquil blue waters. One night, they stood on the deck, leaning against the railing as the ship cut a silent, silver path through the moonlit sea. The air was cool and tasted of salt. It's a twisted kind of logic, Tenzo said quietly, his gaze on the dark horizon. To promise peace by erasing the things that make us human. To offer a cure that is worse than the disease. His past in the Anbu, especially under the command of Danzo, had taught him all too well about the suppression of emotion for the sake of the mission. He had seen what it did to people, the hollowing out of the soul until only the duty remained. This was that same principle, taken to a terrifying, absolute extreme. They're not just emptying people, Naruto replied, his new sensory perception giving him a unique insight. They're replacing what they take. In Otayaka, the people were just gone. But the shinobi who attacked us, they were being controlled. They were puppets. This Yasuga, he's not just a preacher. He's a puppet master. He looked over at Tenzo, whose face was cast in the pale, ethereal light of the moon. He could feel the older man's will, the steady calm that was his signature, but tonight. He could also feel the faintest tremor beneath the surface, the echo of old scars. Naruto found himself wanting to reach out, to offer some comfort, but he wasn't sure how. Instead, he just stood there with him, a silent, shared presence against the vast, lonely dark. It felt like enough. They arrived in Kurigakure to a village on a war footing. The iconic mist that usually shrouded the islands was thin and sparse. A sign of the immense chakra being expended elsewhere. Mei Terumi greeted them not in her formal robes, but in full battle attire, her expression one of polite, strained urgency. Thank you for coming, Naruto-kun, Tenzo-san, she said, leading them to the central command tent. The situation has escalated. Yasuga's forces, the Serene, have seized the waning moon archipelago. Their fleet is preparing for a direct assault on the main island. Inside the tent, Chojuro, now a hardened commander, pointed to a large nautical chart. Their fleet numbers over 100 vessels, mostly converted fishing boats. But they're crewed by shinobi who don't sleep, don't tire, and don't feel fear. Our own forces are skilled, but we're suffering from attrition and the psychological toll of fighting such an enemy. They use the mist against us, Ao added, his Byakugan eye covered by its usual seal. They move like ghosts within it, their coordination is perfect. They don't need to shout orders or use signals. It's as if they share a single mind. They do, Naruto said grimly, and all eyes in the tent turned to him. Yasuga's will is their will. To beat them, we have to cut off the head. A plan was quickly formed. Kiri's main fleet would engage the rebels head-on, a massive frontal assault designed to pin them in place. Naruto and Tenzo, aboard the Mizukage's flagship, would act as a spearhead, punching through the enemy line to locate and eliminate Yasuga himself. It was a high-risk, high-reward strategy that relied entirely on their unique abilities. The battle began at dawn. The sea was a churning cauldron of gray water and thick, unnatural mist. The clang of steel and the roar of water-style jutsu echoed through the fog, punctuated by the silent, deadly assaults of the Serene. They swarmed the Kiri vessels like insects, their movements economical and lethal, their faces placid masks of emptiness. At the prow of the flagship, Tenzo slammed his palms onto the deck. Wood style. Great fleet formation. The ocean erupted. Massive, streamlined ships, forged from dark, durable wood, burst from the waves. They were faster and more resilient than the standard Kiri vessels. Their decks sprouting defensive barricades and projectile launchers. A flotilla of nearly 50 wooden assault ships formed around the Kiri fleet, turning the tide of the naval battle. And giving the beleaguered shinobi stable platforms from which to fight. Tenzo stood on the bridge of the flagship, his hands pressed to a wooden console he had grown from the deck, directing his creations with the focus of a grandmaster. The Kiri shinobi roared with renewed morale. But the mist was still the rebels' greatest ally. I hate not being able to see what I'm hitting, Naruto yelled, squinting into the dense fog. Then give yourself some light, Tenzo's voice called from the bridge. Naruto grinned. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and focused. He didn't project anger or dominance. He projected clarity. See, a silent, invisible pulse of Haki shot out from him. The effect was staggering. For a full kilometer in every direction, the thick, chakra-infused mist vaporized, torn apart not by heat or wind, but by the sheer force of his will. The entire rebel fleet was revealed, their positions and movements laid bare under the morning sun. A collective gasp went through the Kiri fleet, followed by a thunderous cheer. Now we're talking, Naruto shouted, and leapt. He became a blur of orange, crossing the 50 meters of open water to the nearest enemy ship in a series of impossibly fast bounds. He landed amidst a squad of serene shinobi, his presence a balm of pure, vibrant life in their cold, empty world. He moved through them like a storm. His Haki-infused fists didn't just break bones. They shattered the unnatural calm that held the rebels together. Each shinobi he struck would collapse, their connection to Yasuga's will severed, leaving them disoriented and terrified on the deck. He was a one-man boarding party, clearing ships with breathtaking speed and efficiency, his very presence a beacon of defiance that inspired the Kiri forces around him. From the bridge, Tenzo watched him, a feeling of profound pride swelling in his chest. He managed his fleet, sending ships to support flagging lines, erecting massive wooden shields to intercept volleys of water projectiles, and ensnaring enemy vessels in inescapable nets of roots. Naruto was the unstoppable spear. Tenzo was the unbreakable shield. Together, they were turning the tide of the war. They pushed deeper into the enemy formation, their goal the massive, imposing flagship at the center, a repurposed freighter bristling with weapons. On its command deck stood a single, serene figure, a man with long, silver hair and a calm, beatific smile. Yasuga. As they drew near, Yasuga raised a hand. He didn't shout an order. He simply acted. The battle around them changed. The Serene stopped trying to fight Naruto. Instead, they began a series of suicidal attacks against the Kiri ships, blowing holes in their hulls with paper bombs, trying to sink the vessels Naruto was using as stepping stones. Yasuga had been watching them. He had seen Naruto's power, but he had also seen the way Naruto's eyes always flickered back to the flagship, back to the man controlling the wooden fleet. He had seen the anchor. With a speed that defied logic, Yasuga abandoned his ship, running across the surface of the water directly towards Tenzo's flagship. He's coming for you, Naruto yelled, changing direction to intercept. Tenzo was already reacting, his hands a blur of seals. Wood style. Great Wall of the Sea. A monumental wall of interwoven, solid wood erupted from the ocean, 100 feet high, blocking Yasuga's path. But the rebel leader didn't even slow. His smile widened as he phased through the wall, leaving a shimmering, black distortion in his wake. He reappeared on the deck of the flagship, just before Tenzo. The tree must fall before the forest can know peace, he said, his voice unnervingly calm. He thrust his hand forward. It wasn't a punch or a chop. His palm opened, and from it shot a tendril of pure, black anti-life. It looked like a living shadow, a sliver of void. Tenzo's instincts screamed. He tried to leap back, raising a wooden shield, but the black tendril was too fast. It ignored the shield, passing through it as if it were smoke, and struck him square in the chest. Tenzo cried out, a sharp, ragged sound of pure agony. He collapsed to his knees, his hands clutching his chest. Where the tendril had struck, his flak jacket dissolved, and his very skin began to turn a sickly, lifeless gray. The wood of the deck beneath his knees withered and died, turning to brittle, black ash. His connection to his wooden fleet flickered, and dozens of the assault ships began to drift aimlessly. Naruto saw it. From 100 meters away, he saw Tenzo fall. The roar of the battle, the crash of the waves, the shouts of men, it all vanished. The world went utterly, terrifyingly silent. The hot fury he associated with the Kyuubi was nowhere to be found. In its place was something far colder, far deeper. It was the absolute, silent rage of a king whose most precious treasure had been violated. His head snapped up, his gaze locking on Yasuga. The rebel leader's serene smile faltered, replaced by the first flicker of uncertainty he had shown. He had made a grave miscalculation. He thought he had targeted Naruto's weakness. Instead, he had just armed his wrath. Naruto didn't shout. He didn't even move. He just floated into the air, his body a nexus of pure, incandescent will. Then, he unleashed it. It was not a wave or a pulse. It was a global declaration. A silent, metaphysical decree that echoed across the entire archipelago, touching the mind of every single rebel. He is mine. For every member of the Serene, it felt as if the god they were connected to had been suddenly and violently usurped. The calm, empty signal that guided them was obliterated, replaced by the roaring, possessive, undeniable authority of Naruto Uzumaki. Their connection to Yasuga snapped. The effect was absolute. On 100 ships, thousands of shinobi simultaneously stopped fighting. The emptiness in their eyes was replaced by a dawning, horrified confusion. They looked at the weapons in their hands, at the burning ships around them, at the dead and dying, as if waking from a long and terrible nightmare. Yasuga himself screamed, clutching his head as the collective feedback of 1,000 severed connections slammed into his mind. His link to the null, to the void that empowered him, was forcibly and brutally torn away. He collapsed, convulsing on the deck, his serene mask shattered forever. The battle was over. The silence that followed was broken by a single, desperate sound. Naruto appeared on the deck next to Tenzo in a flash of pure speed. He fell to his knees beside him. The wound on Tenzo's chest was not bleeding. It was a growing patch of gray, dead flesh, spreading like a disease, leeching the life and color from him. Tenzo! Naruto cried, his voice breaking. He pressed his hands over the wound. It was cold, so cold. He frantically poured his own chakra, his own vibrant life energy, into Tenzo, fighting the creeping necrosis. Naru, too. Tenzo's breath was a shallow, rattling whisper. Stop. Save your strength. No. Naruto choked out, hot tears streaming down his face, the first he'd shed in years. I'm not letting you go. Do you hear me? I'm not letting you go. Tenzo's trembling, graying hand lifted, his fingers brushing against Naruto's tear-streaked cheek. His eyes, clouded with pain, were fixed on Naruto's face. You are my son, Naruto, he whispered, the words a final, desperate confession. So bright. The simple, profound truth of it shattered the last of Naruto's restraint. Overwhelmed by a tidal wave of terror and a love he could no longer deny, he leaned down and pressed his lips to Tenzo's, a kiss that was not gentle or romantic, but a desperate, frantic plea. A transfer of will, of life, of everything he was. He pulled back, his forehead resting against Tenzo's. Stay with me, Tenzo, he pleaded, his voice a raw whisper. Stay with me. I love you. The words were out, spoken into the terrifying stillness, born of the brink of death. As he held him, desperately pushing his own warmth against the encroaching cold, he felt a faint, hesitant flicker of life under his palms. Kiri's top medical nin, alerted by the sudden end of the battle, were finally swarming the deck, their hands glowing with green chakra. The immediate danger was passing, but in the space of a single, terrifying moment, their world, and the bond at its very center, had been forged anew in the fires of near loss. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Wedding and the Whisper. Tenzo's recovery was a slow, quiet affair. The black, life-sucking one, left by Yasuga had been physically healed by the expert hands of Kurigaka's medics, but the spiritual injury lingered. For days, he was listless, the deep, steady resonance of his will that Naruto had come to know so well muted to a faint hum. The wood he created was brittle, the leaves on his seedlings pale. It was as if a frost had settled deep within his soul. Naruto never left his side. He sat by the hospital bed, a silent, unwavering presence, pouring his own boundless vitality into the room. He didn't try to heal Tenzo with jutsu, he simply existed, a sun driving away the lingering chill. They didn't talk much about the battle, or the confessions spoken in the heat of terror. They didn't have to. The truth of it now lay between them, a solid, tangible thing. One afternoon, as the setting sun painted the ocean outside the window in hues of orange and gold, Tenzo finally created a perfect, vibrant camellia blossom, its petals the color of rich cream. He held it out to Naruto. "Your presence," Tenzo said, his voice still weak but clear for the first time in a week, "is better than any medical ninjutsu." Naruto took the flower, his fingers brushing against Tenzo's. "I was so scared," Naruto admitted. "The memory still raw. I thought I'd lost you." "You didn't," Tenzo said simply, his gaze unwavering. "You called me back." In that moment, stripped of all pretense by the saint, arc reality of what they had almost lost, the path forward seemed blindingly simple. The politics, the threats, the strange new world they were navigating, all of it faded into the background, secondary to the quiet, unshakable truth of the man sitting before him. "Marry me," Naruto said. It wasn't a grand, romantic declaration. It was a statement of fact, a conclusion he had reached in the long, terrifying hours by Tenzo's bedside. "I don't want to be your partner or your guide or your mission. I want to be your family. I want to build a life with you, Tenzo. Properly." Tenzo looked at the earnest, open face of the young man who had faced down the cage and shattered an army, now offering his whole heart with the simple gravity of a vow. The frost inside him melted completely, washed away by a sudden, overwhelming warmth. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, the first Naruto had seen since the battle. "Yes," he said. "Yes, Naruto, I will." Their return to Konoha with the news of their engagement sent a series of small, pleasant shockwaves through the village. Tsunade, upon hearing their announcement in her office, was momentarily struck speechless. Then a wide, fierce grin broke across her face. "Well, I'll be damned," she boomed, slamming a hand on her desk. "The two biggest headaches in my life decide to become one. It's perfect. We'll give you the grandest wedding this village has ever seen. It will be a political statement of unparalleled unity." "Actually, Hokage-sama," Tenzo interjected calmly, "we were hoping for something smaller. Just for us and our friends." Naruto nodded eagerly. "Yeah, a big party." Tsunade's grand political ambitions deflated, replaced by a softer, almost maternal pride. "Fine," she grumbled, though her eyes were shining. "Have it your way." Telling their friends was a whirlwind of emotional, often comical, encounters. They found Kakashi at the memorial stone, his single eye closing as Naruto explained. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he reached out and ruffled Naruto's hair, his voice laced with a complex, gentle warmth. "Your father would be proud, Naruto. Not just of your strength, but of the happiness you've found." Iruka's reaction was far less restrained. Over a celebratory feast at Ichiraku Ramen, his initial shock gave way to a flood of unrestrained, sobbing joy. He hugged them both, drenching their shoulders in tears. Much to Tsuki's amusement. For Iruka, who had seen a lonely, ostracized boy grow into a hero, this was the ultimate victory. Naruto had found a home, not in a village that once scorned him, but in the heart of another. Sakura, when they told her, simply beamed. Her own journey with Naruto had evolved from a childhood crush to a deep, unbreakable bond of camaraderie. She saw the quiet stability Tenzo gave him. The way Naruto's chaotic energy was grounded and refined by his presence. "It makes sense," she said, pulling them both into a fierce hug. "You balance each other. I'm so happy for you." The rest of the Konoha 11 reacted with a mixture of stunned silence, loud congratulations, and easy acceptance. Shikamaru, predictably, sighed and called the ensuing paperwork a drag before offering a lazy, sincere smile. They chose to be married in a place of their own making. On a scenic bluff overlooking the village, Tenzo used his wood style to create a breathtaking ceremonial space. He grew a great, circular canopy of interwoven cherry and maple trees, their leaves a vibrant tapestry of pink and red. The aisle was a carpet of soft, perfect grass, and the altar was a simple, elegant archway of white birch. It was a space born of life itself, a fitting testament to their bond. The day of the wedding was bright and clear. The guest list was a strange and wonderful collection of the most powerful people on the continent, all mingling with ramen chefs and academy instructors. Gaara stood quietly, a faint smile on his face. Mei Terumi chatted amiably with Kurenai, while Chojuro looked on nervously. Representatives from every village were there, a testament to the new reality Naruto had decreed at the summit. "Naruto, dressed in a formal black and orange haori, fidgeted nervously. "I've faced down an army of empty people, and this is what's making my hands sweat," he muttered to Shikamaru, his best man. "Relationships are always more troublesome than battles," Shikamaru replied with a yawn. "At least in a battle, you know who to punch." Then Tenzo appeared at the other end of the aisle. He was dressed in a traditional, dark teal monsuki, the formal attire starkly elegant against his calm demeanor. He looked solid, dependable, and completely at peace. When his eyes met Naruto's, a silent communication passed between them, and all of Naruto's anxiety vanished, replaced by a profound, joyful certainty. Tsunade officiated, her voice foregoing its usual boom in favor of a warm, resonant tone. She spoke of bonds forged in fire, of the strength found in partnership. When it came time for the vows, Naruto, ever unpredictable, had written nothing down. He just looked Tenzo in the eye, his own voice thick with emotion. "When I was a kid, I was alone. I thought being strong meant I didn't need anyone. You taught me that real strength is about having someone to protect. It's about having an anchor. Tenzo, you're my anchor. And my home." Tenzo's own vows were quieter, but no less powerful. "Naruto, you are a force of nature. Son, I spent my life following orders, living in the shadows of others. You taught me to embrace my own will. To build a life, not just follow a mission. My life begins with you." As they exchanged the symbolic cups of sake, a roar of applause and cheers went up from the crowd. Iruka was a mess, sobbing openly into Kakashi's shoulder, who just patted his back with a long-suffering sigh. The reception was a joyous, chaotic affair held in the expansive Akamichi clan compound. Music played, food and drink flowed freely, and for a few perfect hours. There were no Kage, no Jinchuriki, no legendary shinobi, just friends and family celebrating a union born of the most unlikely circumstances. Naruto was in his element, laughing with Kiba, arm wrestling with the Raikage's representative, and generally being the boisterous, happy center of the party. Tenzo remained at his side, a calming presence, his hand resting lightly on Naruto's back, a small, intimate gesture in the midst of the crowd. It was while Naruto was talking with Gaara near the edge of the pavilion that he felt it. A sudden, jarring chill. A pinprick of absolute cold in the warm tapestry of wills he now constantly sensed. It was a subtle intrusion, a sliver of ice in his mind. With it came a voice, ancient, calm, and filled with a profound, weary sorrow. Such a beautiful display, so much feeling, so much attachment, the seeds of all future pain. Naruto froze, the sake cup halfway to his lips. Gaara noticed his sudden stillness. "Naruto, what is it?" Naruto's eyes scanned the crowd, but the cold wasn't coming from outside. It was inside his head. In a shadowy corner of the garden, just beyond the light of the lanterns, a figure began to coalesce. It wasn't solid, more like a distortion in the air, a human-shaped mirage of deep twilight. A man with the unmistakable, tragic eyes of the Uchiha clan. Only Naruto, and a handful of others with incredibly sharp senses, could perceive him. Kakashi's single eye snapped towards the corner, his hand instinctively moving towards his covered Sharingan. Gaara's sand began to shift restlessly at his feet. "You possess a magnificent will, son of Minato," the voice echoed in Naruto's mind. "The will of a true conqueror. But you use it to bind yourself to this fleeting, painful cycle. You build sandcastles of emotion, knowing the tide of suffering will inevitably wash them away. Who are you?" Naruto projected back, his mind a fortress, his haki rising to form a protective wall. The figure offered a sad, knowing smile. "I am Kagami Uchiha, and I am offering you true salvation. I can give this world a peace that will never break. A world without hatred, without grief, without loss. A world without the tyranny of feeling. All you must do is let go. Surrender your will to the great, silent peace of the void. A world of empty puppets like in Odayaka." Naruto's mental voice was a snarl. "That's not peace. That's death." Kagami's sorrowful expression deepened. "You cling to the cage because you are afraid of the freedom outside of it. You cannot see the beauty of silence because your own heart is too loud. Very well. If you will not listen to reason, let me show you the peace you are denying them." Before Naruto could react, a silent, invisible wave of utter nullity washed over the reception. It was not a pressure. It was an erasure. The lively music from the bandstand didn't just stop. The musicians lowered their instruments, their minds suddenly, inexplicably blank, the very concept of melody gone. The roar of laughter and conversation died in 1,000 throats, replaced by a profound, chilling silence. Choji, who had been reaching for a massive piece of roast beef, lowered his hand. His all-consuming hunger simply vanishing. Kiba, in the middle of a loud boast, trailed off, a look of placid emptiness on his face. Hinata's shy, loving gaze on Naruto went blank. In the crowd, Iruka's joyful tears dried up, his expression becoming as still and empty as a doll's. The entire party, hundreds of people, fell utterly silent. They stood or sat, their bodies alive, but their spirits, their emotions, their very selves, had been wiped clean. Tenzo, standing beside Naruto, was hit by the wave. His smile faded, the warm light in his eyes dimmed, replaced by a distant fog. He looked down at his own hand, flexing his fingers with a vague, detached curiosity. But his will, forged in trauma and rooted in the very essence of life, resisted the full effect. He was not completely empty. He looked at Naruto, a flicker of profound confusion in his gaze, the last ember of his consciousness fighting against the encroaching void. Seeing that flicker, seeing the emptiness on the faces of Iruka, Kakashi, Sakura, everyone he loved, unleashed a fire in Naruto's soul. This was not a battle for a village or a nation. This was a battle for the right to feel. Kagami's cold, sorrowful presence was a weight on his mind, whispering of peace. Naruto's fear and horror coalesced into a single, white-hot point of pure, protective defiance. He didn't try to push. He didn't try to conquer. He roared, not with his voice, but with his haki. He unleashed a wave not of pressure, but of pure, unadulterated feeling. It was the warmth of the sun, the joy of a shared bowl of ramen, the fierce loyalty of friendship. The gut-wrenching terror of almost losing the one you love, and the profound, boundless peace of knowing they were safe. It was a wave of life itself, and at its heart was a single, defiant concept. Screamed into the face of the void. Live. The effect was instantaneous. It was like a splash of color on a gray canvas. The musicians blinked and, without knowing why, struck up the liveliest tune they knew. Choji grabbed the roast beef and took a gigantic bite, savoring it as if it were his first meal. Laughter erupted from a dozen places at once. Iruka burst into tears again. A fresh wave of love for his son washing over him. The glorious, chaotic, wonderful noise of the party returned in a sudden, overwhelming rush. Tenzo blinked hard, the fog in his eyes vanishing as if it had never been. He looked from the now empty corner of the garden back to Naruto, his expression hardening with concern and understanding. The projection of Kagami Uchiha was gone. To the guests, it had been a dizzy spell, a strange moment of quiet that was already being forgotten in the renewed revelry. But for the handful who had perceived the truth, a chilling shadow had been cast over the happiest of days. Later that night, long after the last guest had departed, Naruto and Tenzo stood in the quiet of their new home. The joy of their union was now irrevocably bound to the chilling memory of Kagami's power. Naruto reached out, his hand gently touching Tenzo's cheek, the warmth of his skin a reassurance against the memory of that encroaching cold. "He came for you," Tenzo said, his voice low. "He targeted our joy. He targeted everyone." Naruto corrected him, his eyes hard. "He wants to turn the whole world into Odayaka." He pulled Tenzo into a fierce, protective embrace, holding him tightly. Their war was no longer against a faceless, creeping silence. It now had a name and a face. And it had made the fatal mistake of threatening Naruto's family on the day it officially began. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. Scars of the Forgotten. The morning after the wedding dawned bright and deceptively peaceful. To the majority of Konoha, it was a day of cheerful gossip and nursing hangovers. But in the Hokage's most secure, soundproofed council room, the atmosphere was as cold and heavy as a tomb. The hastily assembled group was a council of war. Tsunade, her face grim, Kakashi, his single eye sharp and serious, Shikamaru, his usual laziness burned away by a focused intensity, and Naruto and Tenzo, the joyous glow of the previous day replaced by a hard, resolute sobriety. They were joined by a figure who had slipped back into the village unnoticed amidst the festivities. Jiraiya, the Toad Sage, his expression more serious than Naruto had ever seen it. He had been drawn back by the reverberations of the Gokage summit and the unsettling whispers his spy network had picked up about Naruto's new power. A psychic projection, Jiraiya repeated, stroking his chin as Naruto finished his account of the encounter. He spoke directly into your mind, bypassed all physical and sensory defenses, and nullified the emotions of hundreds of people with a mere thought. This is a level of power that transcends ninjutsu. The name he gave, Kakashi added, his voice low, Kagami Uchiha. I ran a search through the Anbu archives last night. The file is there, a jonin from the time of the second Hokage. Highly decorated, a contemporary of Hiruzen Sarutobi and Danzo. I remember him, Jiraiya said, his eyes distant. He was a prodigy, even for an Uchiha. Fiercely loyal to the village. The records say he died heroically during a skirmish on the border of Iwagakure. The records lie, Tsunade stated flatly. Or they're incomplete. What we faced last night was no ghost. It was a clear and present threat. The ideology he preached, Tenzo said, his voice resonating with a grim certainty, this desire for a world free from emotion, it is the same philosophy that drove the rebels in Kurigakure and the force that created Odayaka. It is a single, unified threat. Kagami is its leader. Shikamaru, who had been silent until now, stepped forward to a large map of the continent. This isn't just about a powerful Uchiha. It's about strategy. He didn't attack the cage at the summit. He didn't try to assassinate a daimyo. He attacked a wedding. He targeted a moment of pure, concentrated joy. It was a psychological strike. A statement of purpose. The room was silent, the weight of that observation settling on them all. Kagami wasn't just a conqueror, he was a zealot. And his war was against the very fabric of human experience. We are fighting a concept, Jiraiya murmured, a look of profound unease on his face. How do you even begin to fight a concept? You start by understanding its history, Tsunade declared, her voice ringing with authority. She turned to her old teammate. Jiraiya, I want you and Shikamaru to lead this. Take Kakashi. I am granting you level 10 clearance. Open the Black Archives. I want every scroll, every mission report, every redacted file pertaining to the era of the second Hokage. Find out who Kagami Uchiha truly was. Find out what happened to him. Find the source of this power. Do not sleep until you have an answer. Konoha's Black Archives were not a library, they were a crypt. A cold, dark, subterranean labyrinth. Where the village's darkest secrets and most painful memories were sealed away in scrolls protected by layers of preservation and misdirection seals. It was the resting place of failed operations, political assassinations, and the unvarnished truths behind the heroic legends. For hours, the three of them worked under the dim, flickering light of ceiling lanterns. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and dust. They found Kagami's official file easily enough. It painted a picture of a brilliant, patriotic shinobi, a master of the Sharingan who valued the will of fire above all else. It was filled with commendations from Tobirama Senju himself. But it was a carefully curated story. Entire sections of his later mission history were blacked out with ink seals of a type Kakashi Recog. NIST is the precursor to Danzo's root protocols. These redactions are absolute, Kakashi noted, running a gloved finger over a blacked-out paragraph. Designed to resist any attempt at analysis, even by the Sharingan. Almost any, Jiraiya grunted, pulling out a complex-looking sealing scroll of his own. Danzo was clever, but Tobirama-sensei was cleverer. The old Anbu command files had a failsafe. A hidden log sealed within the primary scroll, accessible only by combining the command seals of the Hokage and the head of intelligence. A way to prevent even someone like Danzo from completely rewriting history. Working with Shikamaru's sharp, analytical mind, they began the painstaking process of unraveling the master seal. It was a puzzle of breathtaking complexity, designed to frustrate and exhaust any who attempted it. While Konoha's greatest minds delved into the past, Naruto and Tenzo faced the present. They had officially moved into Naruto's apartment, which was now unequivocally their apartment. The process was a quiet, domestic ballet. Tenzo's few belongings, a collection of well-worn books on botany and architecture, a simple tea set, and a single, framed photograph, were integrated among Naruto's chaotic clutter. Who is this? Naruto asked, picking up the photo. It showed 4 young Anbu, unmasked, their faces still impossibly young. He recognized a younger Kakashi, but not the others. My first genin team after I left the labs, Tenzo said, his voice soft as he took the frame. We were assigned to a special Anbu task force under Lord Third. They didn't all make it back from our last mission. Quote, Naruto was quiet, recognizing the familiar weight of loss in Tenzo's eyes. He placed a hand on his husband's shoulder. They stood there for a moment, the silence filled with a shared understanding of the cost of their profession. Later, as they sat sharing a cup of tea, the weight of the previous night's events settled over Naruto. He spoke to me like he knew me, he said, staring into his cup. Like he understood everything I've ever wanted. A world without all the fighting, all the hate. For a second, it almost made sense. That is the nature of his power, Tenzo said, his gaze steady and reassuring. It's a poison that masquerades as a cure. It preys on despair. But you, Naruto, are the antithesis of despair. It's a lot of pressure, though, Naruto admitted. The vulnerability in his voice one he would only ever show to Tenzo. To be the world's living, breathing opposite of nothingness. To know that he's coming for me, for this. He gestured around the small apartment. At their shared life, Tenzo reached across the table and placed his hand over Naruto's. His touch was warm, solid, and real. Then he will have to come for us, he said. His voice imbued with the unshakable certainty of a mountain. You are not facing him alone. Back in the archives, a final seal hissed open, and a thin, hidden scroll rolled out from a secret compartment within Kagami's file. It was his personal log, the ink faded but the words burning with a cold, clear fire. Jiraiya began to read aloud, his voice low and somber. The entries started with pride and patriotism. But as the log chronicled the bloody, attritional battles of the First Shinobi War, the tone began to shift. October 12th, Jiraiya read. Another raid on a supply convoy. We were successful, but we lost 3 good men. Iwagakure lost 5. We call them enemies, but their faces were just as young as ours. They died cursing Konoha. Our men died cursing Iwa. I begin to wonder if they are not both cursing the same pointless god of war. The entries grew darker. Kagami wrote of his disillusionment, his horror at the cycles of revenge, his growing belief that the very emotions that drove men to love and protect their families were the same emotions that drove them to hatred and slaughter. He saw human will not as a gift, but as a fundamental, tragic flaw in creation. The final entry was dated nearly 50 years ago. September 4th. My final mission report will state that I have found a strategic weakness in Iwa's northern patrols. It is a lie. I followed a legend, a whisper from a captured elder about a place older than the villages, a power from before the sage. A ruin, hidden in the ice mountains of the far north. Naruto and Tenzo's collapsed cave. The connection clicked into place in Kakashi's mind. Jiraiya continued, his voice tight. The legends called it the Shrine of the Silent Star. It was not built to honor a god, but to contain one. A primordial entity. The scrolls one found called it Amatsu Mikabashi, the August Star of Heaven, a being of the void that existed before light, before life, before will. A being of perfect, tranquil nothingness. I the Sage of 6 Paths could not destroy it, only seal it away behind the bedrock of the world. I have breached the seals. I have made contact. It showed me everything. A vision of a silent universe. Free from the pointless screaming of individual consciousness. A perfect, final peace. The entity offered this salvation to the world, but it requires a vessel, a voice, a will to undo will. It has chosen me. The final words of the log were written in a hand that was chillingly serene. My official report will state that I was killed in action. Let the village remember me as a hero. It is a kinder memory than the truth. Today, I did not die. Today, I have found salvation. Not for myself, but for everyone. The great silence has begun. A heavy silence descended on the dusty archive. The scope of their enemy was terrifyingly clear. They were not fighting a man. They were fighting a man who had become the apostle of a primordial entity, a force of cosmic nihilism, and he had been planning his silent war for half a century. As if on cue, the heavy door to the archive was thrown open. An Anbu captain stood there, his mask unable to hide his urgency. Jiraiya-sama, Hokage-sama requires you all immediately. An emergency summons from your spy network has arrived. They raced to the Hokage's office. A single, small, green toad stood on Tsunade's desk, panting from the effort of a reverse summoning. The reports are confirmed from 3 separate agents, Lord Jiraiya, the toad croaked. It's happening everywhere. A silver mining town in the western mountains of Earth Country, an entire island of pearl divers in the southern sea of Water Country, a nomadic tribe of weavers in the great dune sea of Wind Country. All of them, gone quiet. Just like the reports from Odayaka. The incidents are accelerating. It's a pattern, a plague of silence, and it's spreading fast. Shikamaru moved to the large map, his hands placing new markers on the locations the toad had named. The red dots formed a horrifying, undeniable web, spreading across the entire continent. The room was grimly silent. Their personal threat, their ideological war, had just become a global pandemic. The alliance Naruto had forged at the summit was about to face its first, terrible test. Naruto looked at the map, at the spreading stain of silence. He felt Tenzo's solid presence behind him, his hand coming to rest on his shoulder. This was no longer just about protecting their home, their joy. The fate of every flickering flame of will in the world now rested on their shoulders. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Council of Wills. The discovery of Kagami Uchiha's history and the true nature of his power had plunged Konoha's leadership into a state of grim readiness. The markers on the world map in the Hokage's office were no longer just points of interest. They were wounds on the face of the world, a creeping necrosis of the soul that was spreading with horrifying speed. The war had begun decades ago in the mind of a despairing Uchiha. But it was only now that the world was beginning to feel the symptoms of his silent plague. There was no debate, no hesitation. Tsunade, with the full backing of Jiraiya and the elders, immediately sent out emergency summons to the other 4 great villages. The message was not a request for a summit, but a demand. It carried the full weight of their shared new knowledge, a detailed report on Kagami, Amatsu Mikabashi, and the verified, coordinated spread of the silent zones. This was not a political issue. It was an extinction-level threat. The night before they were to depart for the Land of Iron, Naruto stood before the map in his home, the red markers seeming to pulse with a malevolent light. The title of hero felt hollow. The victory in Kurigakure felt like a single battle in a war whose scale he was only just beginning to comprehend. The weight of it all pressed down on him, a physical force that made it hard to breathe. "They're going to expect me to have all the answers," he said quietly, his voice barely a whisper. He didn't have to look to know Tenzo was there with him. He could feel his calm, steady presence, a lighthouse in his own internal storm. Tenzo came to stand beside him, his gaze also on the map. He placed a warm cup of tea in Naruto's hands. "They will not be expecting answers, Naruto. They will be bringing their fear. And fear makes powerful people do foolish things." He gently turned Naruto away from the map, forcing him to meet his gaze. "Listen to me. When you walk into that room, you will not just be a shinobi of Konoha. To them, you are the living embodiment of this crisis. You are the only person who has faced this power and mastered its opposite. They will look to you for strength, not strategy." Tenzo's voice was low and certain. The voice of a man who had spent a lifetime observing the psychology of power from the shadows of the Anbu. The Raikage will hide his fear behind anger. He will demand action, any action. So he feels he is in control. The Tsuchikage is old. He fears irrelevance and the destruction of his legacy. He will hide behind cynicism and caution, demanding proof and guarantees you cannot possibly give. The Mizukage fears another civil war. She will be desperate for a solution, which will make her vulnerable to rash decisions. He placed a hand on Naruto's shoulder, his grip firm and grounding. "Do not try to win an argument with them. Just be what you are. The one person in the world who is not afraid of this silence." The atmosphere in the summit hall was a world away from their previous meeting. The overt hostility was gone, replaced by a thick, suffocating blanket of fear. The cage looked haggard, their usual masks of authority worn thin. Each of them had now received first-hand reports from their own shinobi confirming the existence of the silent zones within their borders. The abstract threat had become a chillingly real invasion. The council began, and immediately descended into fractured, fear-driven chaos. The reports are clear. The Raikage, slammed his fist on the table, his voice a thunderous roar. This plague spreads through contact with tainted sources. It is a spiritual contaminant. The only logical course of action is absolute quarantine. We establish a perimeter around these zones and we turn everything inside them to ash and glass. It's the only way to be certain the infection cannot spread. And what of the people in those zones, Raikage Dono? Mei Terumi countered, her voice strained. There are thousands of my people on those islands. They are not dead. We cannot simply incinerate them on the off chance it stops this. It is a regrettable necessity of war. A shot back. This is not a war, it is a pestilence. Onoki argued, his voice a reedy, condescending rasp. And you do not fight a pestilence with explosives. It is a subtle enemy. Iwagakure will focus on its own defense. We will seal our borders and develop a counter-seal to this, will erasing technique. Committing our forces to a joint venture before we even understand the enemy's full capabilities is suicide. Hiding behind your mountains will not save you when the silence seeps through the stone. Tsuchikage. Mei snapped, her desperation showing. The arguments raged, a circular, fruitless debate born of terror. They were 5 fingers, each trying to fend off a flood, refusing to form a fist. Tsunade and Gaara tried to argue for unity, but their words were lost in the cacophony of fear. Naruto, who had remained silent at Konoha's delegation table with Tenzo, finally stood up. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, his presence a sudden, jarring note in the room's chaotic symphony. One by one, the arguments faltered as the cage turned their attention to him. The hall fell into a tense, expectant silence. He walked to the center of the room, just as he had before. But this time, he was not there to issue a decree. He was there to build a bridge. He closed his eyes and unleashed his Haki. There was no pressure, no weight, no terrifying declaration of dominance. Instead, it felt like the clear, perfect note of a singing bowl, a resonant frequency that vibrated not in the ears, but in the soul. It was a wave of pure, absolute clarity. The red haze of rage clouding the Raikage's judgment thinned, revealing the terrified man beneath, a leader desperate to protect his people. The thick, crusty layers of cynicism and pride around Onoki's heart momentarily dissolved, exposing the weary old warrior who had seen too much death and was terrified of seeing more. The knot of panicked desperation in Mei's chest loosened, allowing her a moment of calm, rational thought. Their personal fears, their political posturing, their ancient rivalries, all of it was gently, but firmly set aside by Naruto's will. All that remained was the 5 of them, and the stark, unvarnished truth of the abyss they faced. Into that perfect, resonant silence, Naruto spoke. His voice was calm, clear, and filled with an empathy that transcended village loyalties. I hear your fear, Raikage Dono. You want to build a firewall of thunder and lightning to protect your people. It is the action of a true protector. He turned to Onoki. And I hear your caution, Tsuchikage Dono. You want to build a shield of stone and seals to weather the storm. It is the action of a wise and experienced leader. He met Mei's gaze. And I feel your heart, Mizukage Dono. You want to find a cure, to save every last life. It is the action of a compassionate ruler. He let them feel the truth in his words, the validation of their deepest motivations. But you are all looking at the wrong map, he continued, his voice gaining strength. This enemy, Kagami, does not want your land. He does not want your resources. He doesn't even want your lives. He wants to erase the very things that make you argue in this room today. He wants to erase your anger, your caution, your compassion. He wants to take the will that makes you cage, the will of your shinobi, the will of the blacksmiths and the farmers and the children in your villages, and replace it all with a perfect, endless, silent peace. He paused, letting the full horror of that sink in. Hiding behind our walls will not save us. Burning the afflicted lands will not cure us, because this is not a disease of the body. It is a war for the soul. And we are all on the front line. He then did something extraordinary. He didn't just speak. He shared. He opened his own will, not to impose it, but to offer it as a testament. The cage felt it, his unwavering resolve, his fierce, protective love for his friends, his deep, sorrowful empathy for the faceless thousands who had already been lost to the silence, and his absolute Burning determination to protect everyone, from the cage of Suna to the most nameless pearl diver in Kiri. They felt his certainty, and it became a rock for them to cling to in their own sea of fear. We have only one choice, Naruto concluded, his voice ringing with the clarity he had imposed on the room. To stand together, not as 5 villages, but as one will, united against the silence. The allied shinobi forces must be born today, not as a weapon of conquest, but as a shield for our right to exist. To feel, to choose. The resonant hum of his haki faded, but its effect remained. The clarity was gone, but the memory of it, the truth it had shown them, lingered. The arguments were over. The fear was still there, but now, it was no longer a force of division. It was a catalyst for unity. Gaara stood, his voice steady. Suna seconds Naruto's proposal. I formally move for the immediate formation of the allied shinobi forces. Mei Terumi stood as well. Kurigakure is in agreement. The Raikage looked at Onoki. A new, grudging respect in his eyes. He gave a sharp, decisive nod. Kumogakure will join. All eyes turned to Onoki. The old Tsuchikage looked at Naruto, a long, calculating stare. He saw not a naive boy, but a leader of a kind the world had never known. He heaved a great sigh, the sigh of a man setting down a lifetime of burdens. It would seem Iwagakure has little choice but to agree. It is a troublesome situation. A new, unprecedented problem immediately arose. An allied army required a single, unified command. But they were 5 supreme leaders. The idea of one of them bending the knee to another was politically impossible. As they began to debate the command structure, Onoki raised a hand, silencing them. He looked around the table, then his gaze settled firmly on Naruto. This is a fool's errand, the old Kage said, his voice surprisingly strong. There is only one person in this room with a will strong enough to be the center of this storm. There is only one person who is the clear and stated target of our enemy. And there is only one person who managed to make the 5 of us shut up and agree on something. I may be an old man, but I am not a blind one. He straightened up, his voice ringing with historic gravity. I, Onoki, the 3rd Tsuchikage of Iwagakure, nominate Naruto Uzumaki of Konoha as Supreme Commander of the Allied Shinobi Forces. A stunned silence filled the hall. Then, one by one, the other Kage nodded their assent. It was the only possible conclusion. The decision was unanimous. That night, back in their quarters, the full, crushing weight of that title, Supreme Commander, settled onto Naruto's shoulders. He stood by the window, staring out at the dark, silent mountains, feeling smaller than he had ever felt in his life. How can I do this, Tenzo? He asked, his voice strained. I'm not a commander. I'm not Shikamaru, or you, or Kakashi-sensei. I'm just me. How can I lead an entire army? Tenzo came to stand behind him. His presence a familiar comfort. He placed a hand on Naruto's shoulder. You have been leading them since you first walked into this hall, Naruto, he said, his voice a low, steady anchor. You don't lead with maps and strategies. You lead with this. He gently tapped his fingers over Naruto's heart. You remind them what they are fighting for. You are their will made manifest. That is a form of leadership that cannot be taught in any academy. He squeezed Naruto's shoulder gently. The strategies, the logistics, the battle plans, that is why you have us. You will never be alone in this command. I am your shield. Shikamaru is your mind. Kakashi is your blade. All you have to be, is the heart. Naruto looked at their reflection in the dark glass of the window. He saw his own face, still so young, filled with doubt, and behind him, he saw Tenzo's, calm and unwavering. He saw not a boy and his guardian, but a commander and his most trusted advisor. His doubt didn't vanish, but it was joined by a new, fierce resolve. The war had a face. The world had an army. And now, that army had its heart. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Siege of Silence. The staging ground. D of the Allied Shinobi Forces was a city born of necessity, a sprawling, orderly encampment on the coast of the mainland, just across the churning sea from the land of whirlpools. It was a sight that would have been unthinkable only a few months prior. Shinobi from the cloud, the stone, the mist, and the sand worked alongside those from the leaf, their village headbands a vibrant, clashing tapestry of unity. Samurai from the land of iron patrolled the perimeter, their impassive steel a silent promise of support. The air buzzed with a nervous, electric energy, the deep breath before the plunge. In the central command tent, the atmosphere was one of strained, focused calm. A massive, detailed map of Uzushiogakure and the surrounding islands was spread across a table, upon which Shikamaru nar. Moved unit markers with the lazy precision of a master shogi player. Kagami's forces, the silent, have made landfall here, Shikamaru said, tapping a northern beach on the main island. Our recon. Nascence confirms their numbers are in the tens of thousands. They've established no camp, no supply lines. They just stand there, waiting. They don't need supplies, Tenzo added, his arms crossed. They don't eat, they don't sleep. They are a perfect, relentless siege engine. Gaara, representing Suna's command, traced a line on the map. My regiments will create a defensive wall of sand on the western flank. We can funnel their advance into the city's primary causeway. It will create a bottleneck. Naruto listened, absorbing the information. He was dressed in a custom-made flak jacket, earring the new insignia of the allied shinobi forces, a spiral encompassing the symbols of the 5 great villages. The title of Supreme Commander felt heavy on his shoulders, but Tenzo's counsel had given him clarity. He was not here to be the smartest strategist. He was here to be the strongest heart. He stepped up to the map, and all eyes turned to him. Gaara's bottleneck is our best chance. We'll meet them there. But this isn't just about holding a line. Their greatest weapon isn't their numbers, it's the despair they spread. Every shinobi in this army needs to know what they are fighting for. He turned to leave the tent. I'm going to address the troops. He stood on a high platform Tenzo had raised from the earth, looking out at the sea of faces, thousands of shinobi, the hope of the entire world. He took a deep breath, and his voice, amplified by a wind-style user, carried over the entire army. Look around you, he began, his voice clear and strong. You see the headbands of your rivals, your old enemies. For generations, we have fought and bled for the sake of these symbols, for lines on a map. Today, we fight for something more. We fight for the person standing next to you. We fight for our families back home. We fight for the right to laugh, to cry, to feel anger, to love. He paused, his gaze sweeping over them all. Our enemy offers peace. The peace of the grave. The silence of the void. We offer each other something better. The loud, messy, difficult, and beautiful chaos of a life worth living. We are not fighting for land. We are fighting for the right to have a soul. Let them come. Let them break against us like a wave against the shore. For the allied shinobi forces. A single, unified roar went up from the army, a wave of sound and will that shook the very air. In that moment, they were no longer 5 villages. They were one. The ruins of Uzushiogakure were a place of profound and sorrowful beauty. Great, crumbling towers adorned with the spur, emblem of Naruto's ancestors stood like ancient, forgotten sentinels against a gray sky. The air was thick with the salt of the sea and the weight of history. For Naruto, stepping onto the shores of his ancestral homeland was a deeply personal, poignant moment. This was a city that had been destroyed, its people scattered, a testament to the failure of the old ways. It was the perfect place to make a stand for a new one. The allied shinobi forces took up their positions within the ruins, using the crumbling architecture as natural fortifications. And then, the enemy came. They appeared over a high ridge to the north, a silent, flowing river of bodies. They moved in perfect, synchronized lockstep, their feet making a single, rhythmic, tramping sound. There were no war cries, no battle standards, no intimidating displays. Just the relentless, silent advance of an army of the dead who were still walking. Leading them was a towering figure in dark, archaic armor, a former samurai of some renown who had fallen to the null. Now serving as Kagami's silent general on the battlefield. The two armies met in the great, ruined causeway that led to the city's heart. The roar of the alliance shattered the silence as they charged. A wave of color and sound and fury. They crashed against the silent, unyielding line of the enemy. The initial clash was a brutal, disorienting shock to the allied forces. Shinobi, trained to exploit an enemy's pain and fear, found themselves utterly at a loss. A sand shinobi drove his blade into a silent's chest, and the puppet soldier simply continued its forward march, impaling itself further to get within striking distance. A mist ninja trapped a squad in a water prison, only for them to stand placidly, waiting for the jutsu to fail, their lack of panic unnerving. They were a relentless tide, chipping away at the Alliance's defenses through sheer, unfeeling attrition. From a high vantage point on a crumbling tower, Tenzo directed the battlefield. Earth and wood users, reinforce the western wall. Wind and fire, concentrate your attacks on the central column. Do not let them break our formation. He slammed his hands onto the stone beneath him. Wood style. Rampart of thorns. Massive walls of interlaced, thorny wood erupted from the ground, splitting the Silent's main force, creating new choke points and separating their vanguard from their support. The battlefield itself was his weapon, and he wielded it with the precision of a master surgeon, constantly reshaping the engagement to the Alliance's favor. But for every silent soldier they cut down, another stepped forward to take its place. The battle raged for hours, and the grim reality of their enemy began to set in. Despair is a poison, and on a battlefield, it spreads faster than any plague. As the hours wore on and the bodies of friends and comrades began to litter the ground, the bright flame of morale in the Allied army began to waver. Naruto, fighting on the front lines like a whirlwind of orange light, felt it with his haki. He felt the sharp sting of fear, the cold touch of grief, and the weary, creeping exhaustion in the souls of his soldiers. The bright constellation of their wills was beginning to dim, and in that dimness, the silence found its purchase. He saw it happen near Gaara's sand wall. A young stone ninja, a girl no older than 16, watched her sensei get cut down by the silent general. A heart-wrenching sob tore from her throat, and in that moment of overwhelming grief, her will shattered. Her movements became sluggish. The fierce determination in her eyes went blank. She stopped fighting the silent in front of her. Then, slowly, she turned, and with a vacant expression, drove her kunai into the back of the leaf shinobi fighting beside her. Chaos and terror erupted in that section of the line. She's turned. The girls turned. Naruto saw it spreading. Other soldiers, witnessing this new horror, fell into a deeper despair, making them vulnerable. A few more began to falter, their fighting spirit guttering out like dying candles. The encroaching will of the null was a tangible presence now, a cold, psychic pressure that sought out the cracks in their resolve. This was the true battle, not of steel and jutsu, but of hope and despair. Naruto knew what he had to do. Leaping from crumbling wall to collapsing archway, he made his way to the tallest, most central point of the ruins, the shattered spire of the Uzukage's main tower. Below him, the entire, sprawling battlefield was laid out, a tapestry of desperate struggle. He took a deep breath. And he released his will. It was not the focused, clarifying hum from the summit. It was a raw, defiant, unconditional roar of pure spirit. A golden wave of warmth and light, visible only to the soul, erupted from him, washing over the entire Allied army. It was not a command. It was a feeling. It was the feeling of Iruka's hand on his head, of Kakashi's quiet pride, of Sakura's unshakable friendship, of Jiraiya's boisterous laugh, of Tenzo's steady presence at his back. It was every bond, every promise, every scrap of hope and love he had ever known, weaponized against the encroaching emptiness. The message it carried was simple and absolute: you are not alone. The effect was instantaneous and profound. The flickering wills of the thousands of allied shinobi were reignited, burning with a fierce, shared light. The poison of despair was burned away, replaced by a surge of defiant courage. The young stone ninja who had turned, convulsed as if struck by lightning, the blankness in her eyes shattering as she collapsed, free from the null's hold. The entire army felt the surge, their exhaustion momentarily forgotten, their resolve forged anew into something unbreakable. They let out a collective roar. No longer the sound of individual villages, but the single, unified voice of the allied shinobi forces. Now, Naruto's voice boomed, amplified by his own haki. Push them back. For the future. The tide turned. Bolstered by Naruto's will, the allied forces rallied with a ferocity that stunned even themselves. Gaara's sand defenses surged forward, not just defending but attacking, crushing scores of the silent. Kakashi and Guy led a lightning-fast charge through the central breach, a whirlwind of lightning and flying kicks. The cage of the other villages, inspired by Naruto's display, unleashed their most powerful techniques, tearing holes in the enemy ranks. Naruto himself descended from the tower like a meteor, a Rasenshuriken screaming in his hand, and carved a path directly to the silent general. Their clash was titanic, but the general's cold, logical precision was no match for Naruto's incandescent, Haki-fueled rage. The battle ended when Naruto's attack vaporized the general, and with his destruction, the last vestiges of coordination in the silent army crumbled. They did not retreat. They were simply, methodically, overwhelmed and destroyed. As the sun began to set, casting long, bloody shadows over the ruins, a new kind of silence fell over the battlefield. The silence of exhaustion, of grief, of victory. The euphoria of the win was a fleeting thing, quickly extinguished by the grim reality of its cost. Medics moved through the field, their green jutsu a soft, sad glow in the twilight. The dead were honored and sealed in scrolls to be taken home. But there was another category of casualty. Naruto walked through the makeshift field hospital, Tenzo at his side. He saw the wounded, the dying. But then he saw the tent designated for the lost. Inside, dozens of allied shinobi sat on cots, staring blankly into space. Among them was the young stone ninja. They had won her back from the enemy, but not from the silence. Her body was alive, but her spirit, her will, was gone, extinguished like a flame in a vacuum. It was a fate so much worse than death. He saw the true cost of this war. For every soldier lost on the battlefield, another soul could be lost to the void. The price of victory was measured in more than just blood. Later, Naruto and Tenzo stood on the crumbling spire where he had turned the tide. They looked down at the ruined city of his ancestors. Now also the site of the allied Foss's first, costly victory. The setting sun painted the clouds a bruised purple and orange. My family was known for their life force, Naruto said quietly. His voice raspy with fatigue. They were so full of life that they had to build a whole city to contain it. Kagami, he wants to turn the whole world into this. He gestured to the silent, empty ruins. He felt the immense weight of the souls they had lost, both the dead and the empty. He felt the burden of command, the responsibility for every single life. It was heavier than any mountain. Tenzo stood beside him, a silent, solid presence. He didn't offer empty words of comfort. He simply shared the weight of the moment, his steady will a quiet support for Naruto's own. Naruto looked at the horizon, at the last sliver of the setting sun. The cost of this victory was staggering, but it had not broken him. It had clarified everything. He was not just fighting against an enemy. He was fighting for every soul Kagami sought to erase. He was fighting for the noisy, messy, beautiful, and precious right to be alive. His resolve, tested in the fires of battle and tempered by the sorrow of loss, hardened into something pure and unbreakable. The war was far from over, but here, in the ruins of his past, he had found the unshakable foundation for the world's future. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Heart of the Void. In the months that followed the costly victory at Uzushiogakure, the war settled into a grim, grinding stalemate. The allied shinobi forces, under the strategic command of Shikamaru and the defensive genius of Tenzo, had established a fortified line across the continent, a great wall against which the endless, silent tide of Kagami's forces broke and broke again. They could hold the line, but they could not advance. The silent army, replenished by every village that fell to the creeping plague of despair, was effectively infinite. They were fighting a war of attrition against an enemy who felt no loss. Jiraiya's spy network, working with a feverish intensity, had finally pinpointed the source. Kagami Uchiha was not on the battlefield. He was nestled deep in the frozen northern mountains, in the very same pre-shinobi ruin where he had first made contact with the entity Amatsu Mikabashi. It was no longer just a cave, it was the heart of the enemy. A fortress of pure will from which he directed his silent conquest. It was during a tense strategy meeting in the main command tent that he arrived. The air outside the tent shimmered, a figure stepped out of a vortex of swirling space. He was dressed in a dark, traveling cloak, his single arm tucked into his sleeve, the Rinnegan in one eye and the Sharingan in the other blazing with cold, arrogant light. Sasuke Uchiha had returned. The tension in the tent became sharp enough to cut. Every Konoha shinobi tensed, hands moving towards their weapons. Naruto simply stared, his expression a storm of shock, anger, And a deep, buried flicker of hope. "What are you doing here, Sasuke?" Naruto's voice was low and dangerous. "I was tracking a peculiar chakra signature, or rather, a lack of one," Sasuke said. His voice as cold and clipped as ever. His gaze swept over the room, dismissing everyone until it landed on Naruto. "I found entire communities erased, their presence on the spiritual plane simply gone. My investigation led me to the pathetic ramblings of a fallen Uchiha who thinks he can achieve peace by turning humanity into a hive of mindless insects." He looked directly at Naruto, a grudging, almost imperceptible respect in his eyes. "This is not your fight alone, Naruto. Kagami's plan to erase individuality is an insult to the memory of my clan. It is an obstacle to my own ambitions. I am not here to rejoin your village. I am here to eliminate a common enemy. After he is gone, you and I will settle our own accounts." It was a temporary, self-serving truce, but it was a truce nonetheless. Shikamaru, ever the pragmatist, saw the opportunity immediately. A direct assault on his fortress is impossible. We'd be sending our army into a meat grinder. But a small, elite strike team, one that could bypass his forces and strike at the heart. The decision was made in minutes. The mission was one of surgical, metaphysical infiltration. The team would be the original Team 7, Naruto, Sakura, and Sasuke, reunited under the most dire circumstances in history. And they would have a fourth member. "I'm going with you," Tenzo stated, his voice leaving no room for argument. He looked at Naruto. "You are the heart of this army. I am your shield. That does not change, no matter the battlefield." Kagami's fortress was not a structure of stone and mortar. From the outside, it was merely the collapsed, ice-choked cave entrance they had found before. But as the four of them passed the threshold, reality buckled and warped. The familiar world of snow and rock dissolved, replaced by a landscape born from a despairing mind. They stood on a vast, gray plain under a sky of bruised purple, devoid of a sun, moon, or stars. In the distance, the crumbling silhouettes of empty, silent cities rose like tombstones. The air was still and cold, carrying no scent, no sound. It was a world drained of all sensory detail, a perfect embodiment of the null. "It's a mindscape," Sakura breathed, her medical training allowing her to sense the profound psychological pressure of the place. "A world built and sustained by Kagami's will. Then to move forward, we must impose our own," Sasuke said, his Sharingan blazing to life. They moved as one, a tight, coordinated unit, pushing through the oppressive emptiness. But the fortress fought back not with traps, but with their own souls. The gray landscape around them began to shift, to swirl like smoke, and walls of pure thought, woven from their own deepest insecurities, rose up between them, separating them in an instant. Each was plunged into a personalized labyrinth of regret. Sakura found herself back in the forest of death during the Chunin exams, her body frozen with fear as the sound ninja advanced. An illness, ion of her younger self stood before her, tears in her eyes. "You're still the same," the illusion whispered. "Always needing Naruto and Sasuke-kun to save you. You're a burden." Sakura squeezed her eyes shut. But then her hands clenched into fists. "No," she said, her voice shaking but firm. She remembered healing Tenzo on the brink of death, of managing the entire Allied Medical Corps. "My strength isn't in my fists. It's in my hands. It's in my will to heal, to save, to hold our world together." The forest dissolved around her, and she stood once more on the gray plain. Sasuke was confronted with the Uchiha compound on the night of the massacre. Illusions of his parents and his clan surrounded him, their faces not angry, but disappointed. An image of Itachi stood before him. "You have forgotten your purpose, little brother," the illusion of Itachi said, his voice laced with sorrow. "This is a distraction. Your hatred is all you have. Do not forsake it for their pointless war." Sasuke's body trembled with rage and grief. But he looked past the ghosts of his family at the empty sky. "My hatred is my own," he snarled. "My will is my own. I will not let this pathetic excuse for an Uchiha erase everything. My vengeance included," into a quiet nothingness. The ghosts faded to dust. Tenzo was in a cold, dark laboratory, the air thick with the smell of chemicals. He was a child again, floating in a tube, wires attached to his body. An illusion of Orochimaru, his golden eyes gleaming, smiled at him. You are my greatest success, Tenzo, the serpent hissed. But do not forget what you are. A copy. An experiment. Hashirama's cells, my ambition. There is nothing in you that is truly your own. You are a hollow man, a vessel for the will of others. Tenzo's breath hitched, the old trauma cold hand gripping his heart. But then he thought of a quiet apartment filled with sunlight, of a shared cup of tea, of a boisterous, heartfelt laugh. He thought of Naruto. A small, defiant smile touched his lips. I have a home, he said, his voice quiet but unbreakable. I have a husband. I have a life that I built. That is my will, and it is more real than you ever were. The lab shattered like glass. Naruto's trial was the cruelest. He was in Konoha, but it was not the village that had once scorned him. It was worse. It was a village that was utterly, peacefully indifferent to him. He saw Iruka laughing with a group of academy students, and when he called his name, the man just gave him a polite, blank stare of non-recognition. He saw his friends, the Konoha 11, enjoying a barbecue, their bond strong. But he was not a part of them. He saw Tenzo, walking out of the Hokage Tower, looking content and professional, and his gaze passed right through Naruto as if he were a ghost. This was his deepest, most primal fear realized. Not to be hated, but to have never mattered at all. A crushing loneliness, colder and darker than any he had ever known, threatened to swallow him whole. His will, his mighty Haki, wavered, but even as the illusion pressed in, a feeling, a memory of a feeling, held him fast. The memory of Tenzo's hand in his, the feeling of Sakura's determined loyalty. The feeling of Sasuke's grudging, unbreakable bond. These things were real. He knew they were real. He closed his eyes, shutting out the illusory world, and focused on that truth. You're my anchor, Tenzo, he thought. The memory of his own wedding vow a defiant spark in the darkness. His love was his reality. His Haki erupted, not as a wave, but as a declaration of pure, undeniable existence. The indifferent Konoha shattered, and he found himself in the heart of the void. It was a space of perfect, calm nothingness, a sphere of non-existence. In the center, sitting in a meditative posture, was Kagami Uchiha. He opened his eyes, and they were filled not with malice, but with an ancient, profound sadness. You have a powerful will, Naruto Uzumaki, Kagami's voice echoed in the void. You build such strong attachments. I commend you, but can you not see that they are the source of all your pain? He did not attack, he simply opened his mind. Naruto was flooded with a vision, a torrent of shared consciousness. He saw the entire, bloody history of the shinobi world, war after war, bodies piled high, villages burning, children crying over the corpses of their parents. He felt the endless, repeating cycle of hatred and revenge. Then, Kagami showed him the world he would create. A silent world, people moved in perfect, harmonious synchronicity. There was no conflict, no poverty, no tears, no hatred, no grief. It was a world of absolute, unshakable peace. A world without a single spark of will. Is this not the peace you have bled for? Kagami's voice was a gentle, tempting whisper. A world without pain. I am offering you the fruit of all your struggle. I am offering you an end to the cycle. Why do you resist salvation? Naruto looked upon the silent, peaceful faces in the vision. And what he felt was not relief, but a deep, visceral horror. He saw a world without Iruka's pride, without Kakashi's wisdom, without Sakura's fire, without Sasuke's ambition. A world without Tenzo's quiet, steadfast love. You're wrong. Naruto's voice was a low, powerful tremor in the void. You think peace is just the absence of pain. That's not peace. It's nothing. You've been alone. For so long you've forgotten what it means to be alive. He met Kagami's sad eyes, his own blazing with a furious, passionate light. Pain is a part of it. The fear of losing someone is the proof that you love them. The grief is the testament to how much they meant. I would rather live a million lifetimes in a world of beautiful, messy, painful chaos with the people I love, than a single second in your perfect, silent graveyard. This was his answer, his decree, the ultimate affirmation of his entire existence. His Conqueror's Haki erupted from him, a golden sun of pure life, will, and connection. Screaming defiance against the encroaching nothingness. In response, Kagami became a conduit for the null, his body dissolving into a vortex of absolute, soul-devouring void. The two ultimate, Opposing forces, the affirmation of existence and the embrace of non-existence, met in the heart of the fortress. The mindscape screamed as it began to tear itself apart, unable to contain the cataclysmic clash of two gods. Just as the golden sun and the black vortex collided, the walls of the void shattered, and Sakura, Sasuke, and Tenzo arrived, just in time to witness a battle for the soul of reality itself. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The Dawn of the Conqueror. The clash was absolute. The golden sun of Naruto's Haki, a roaring testament to life and connection, met the silent, devouring black hole of Kageme's void. The mindscape, a reality built on a foundation of despair, could not withstand such a fundamental conflict. It shattered. The world dissolved into a screaming vortex of light and shadow, and the four shinobi were violently ejected back into the physical world. They landed hard on the frozen, crumbling stone of the mountain ruin, the air instantly biting with a natural, worldly cold. But the ruin itself was screaming. The ancient stones were not breaking or exploding, they were being unmade, dissolving into gray, featureless dust as the metaphysical battle spilled out into reality. Kageme's physical body, which had reappeared with them, was convulsing on the ground. He was the epicenter of the cataclysm. Black fissures of pure nothingness spread across his form like cracks in porcelain. He had become a flawed, failing vessel for a power far too vast for any mortal shell. He's losing control, Sakura yelled, already weaving seals for a protective barrier. The entity, it's breaking free. As she spoke, Kageme's body arched back, a silent scream tearing his mouth open, and then he simply imploded, collapsing into a swirling vortex of black energy. The vortex pulsed once, twice, and then stabilized, coalescing. It was not a monster. It was not a beast. It was a hole in the world. A perfect sphere of absolute blackness, roughly the size of a man, hovering in the center of the cavern. It did not reflect light, it consumed it. It did not make a sound, it erased it. The very air around it grew still and silent. Where it drifted close to the cavern walls, the stone simply ceased to exist, leaving behind a smooth, featureless edge. This was Amatsu Mikabashi, the primordial void, given form. Stay back, Sasuke shouted, manifesting the skeletal ribcage of his Susanoo as a shield. Don't let it touch you. He fired an Amaterasu-laced arrow at the sphere. The black flames, said to be as hot as the sun, flew towards the void, and vanished, extinguished without a trace a foot from its surface. Sakura, her 100 healings seal spreading across her body, slammed her fist into the ground, sending a shockwave of chakra-infused rock towards the sphere. The Ibris disintegrated into nothingness as it approached. Physical attacks are useless, she confirmed, her face pale. It's not destroying them, it's unmaking them. Tendrils of the same living shadow that had struck Tenzo in Kurigakure lashed out from the sphere, not attacking, but seeking, tasting the reality around them. Sasuke's Susanoo blocked one, the ethereal chakra construct groaning as its energy was nullified at the point of contact. Sakura had to physically leap out of the way of another, the rock she had been standing on simply vanishing. They were on the defensive, fighting a battle they could not possibly win. Naruto, pushed to his knees by the sheer pressure of the entity's presence, felt a familiar, powerful voice roar in his mind. Kit, this is not an enemy you can punch. Kurama's voice was laced with something Naruto had never heard before, a primal, existential fear. It is the antithesis of everything we are. If it is not stopped, we will all be unmade. Then, other voices joined the foxes. Son Goku, Matabi, Isobu, all 9 of the tailed beasts, beings of pure emotion and chakra, their very existence anathema to the silent void, cried out in unison within him. They were not offering him their chakra. They were offering him their will. Their rage, their pride, their sorrow, their history, all of it flowed into Naruto, a torrent of pure, unbridled feeling. Naruto's golden aura of Haki exploded outwards, intensified 100-fold, blazing with the combined will of the ancient Biju. He had become a living conduit for the world's most powerful emotions. As Sasuke and Sakura desperately deflected the lashing tendrils of the void, Tenzo saw the true nature of the battle. Naruto was preparing for a conceptual war, but he was fighting on crumbling, dissolving ground. He needed an anchor. He needed a foundation for reality itself. He drove his hands deep into the groaning stone of the mountain. I will not let you erase our world. He roared, his own will, the will to live, to build, to protect, surging through him. Wood style. Genesis of the world tree. The mountain screamed as a colossal tree of pure, vibrant life erupted from its peak. Its roots, thick as rivers, plunged deep into the bedrock, weaving through the very fabric of space, their life-giving energy a direct counter to the null's unmaking effect. The crumbling of the cavern slowed, then stopped. Great, arching branches formed a protective canopy overhead, leaves of brilliant green unfurling and glowing with a soft, living light. Tenzo had created a bastion of reality, a sacred ground of pure life upon which they could make their final stand. Anchored by the unshakable life force of the world tree, Naruto rose to his feet. His body was blazing, a miniature sun of golden Haki. He met the silent, all-consuming gaze of the void. He knew he could not destroy it. Nothingness could not be destroyed. But it could be contained. It could be defined. He did not form a Rasengan. He did not gather chakra for an attack. He gathered every memory, every feeling, every bond he had ever known. He gathered his love for his husband, his loyalty to his friends, his hope for the future. He became the living embodiment of a single, defiant concept. He unleashed it all in one final, titanic wave of Haki. It was not a wave of force. It was a wave of meaning. It carried the concept of existence itself. The idea of individuality, of choice, of a will that was one's own. It carried the joy of a shared meal, the pain of a farewell, the struggle of a difficult training session, the peace of a quiet evening at home. It was a metaphysical storm of everything that made life worth living, and at its heart was a single, undeniable, roaring truth, projected into the face of the void. We are. The wave of meaning slammed into the sphere of Amatsu Mikabashi. The entity, for the first time, recoiled. It could unmake matter and energy, but it could not unmake a concept when it was wielded with such absolute conviction. The golden energy of Naruto's Haki began to weave around the sphere, not attacking it, but containing it. The very ideas he was projecting became the bars of a metaphysical cage. The void was being defined, sealed, but the seal needed a lock, a permanent, unbreakable core of will to hold it for eternity. Naruto knew what he had to do. Without a moment's hesitation, he offered a part of himself. A single, pure, golden thread of his own Haki, his own soul, extended from his chest and wove itself into the center of the newly formed seal, becoming its eternal, unyielding lock. He was now the warden of the void, his will forever bound to its containment. The sphere of blackness pulsed, then shrank, collapsing in on itself until it was a tiny, sealed point of darkness that faded from sight. Banished from the physical world. With the entity sealed, the last remnants of its power fled the cavern. The crumbling form of Kagami Uchiha, now freed from the will that had possessed him for so long, lay on the floor. The black fissures faded, revealing the face of a man, old and weary. He opened his eyes, the Sharingan faded, and looked at Naruto, who stood, exhausted but resolute, in the protective embrace of the world tree. The madness, the despair, the ancient sorrow, it was all gone from Kagami's eyes. All that remained was a profound, tired understanding. So bright, he whispered, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on his cheek. Then, his body, no longer sustained by the null's power, dissolved into a gentle cascade of harmless dust, finally at peace. 5 years later, the world was different. The scars of the silent war remained, villages that were still repopulating, a generation of shinobi who had seen a horror beyond kenjutsu and ninjutsu. But the world was also more united than it had ever been. The allied shinobi forces had been maintained as a permanent peacekeeping organization, a testament to the bonds forged in the face of annihilation. The title of Hokage had been offered to Naruto Uzumaki. He had, to the shock of many, refused. His duty, he had explained, was not to a single village, but to the world. He had become a global peacemaker, a figure of immense respect and authority who moved between the nations, resolving disputes and helping to rebuild. On a sun-drenched bluff overlooking a peaceful, thriving Konoha, stood a house unlike any other. It was a beautiful, elegant structure of living, interwoven wood, its beams and walls still faintly pulsing with life. In the garden, Tenzo, his hair now touched with a little more silver at the temples, was carefully tending to a bed of rare, midnight blue roses. He looked up as Naruto walked up the path, home from a long diplomatic mission in the Land of Wind. Naruto was taller, his features sharper, carrying the quiet, confident authority of a man who had looked into the void and not flinched. But when he saw Tenzo, the weight of the world lifted from his shoulders, and his familiar, sun-bright grin broke across his face. "How was the trip?" Tenzo asked, his own smile warm and easy as he wiped the soil from his hands. "Long," Naruto replied, pulling him into a welcome embrace. "And full of way too much talking. Gaara says hello. What's for dinner?" "Your favorite," Tenzo said simply. They stood there for a moment, arms around each other, looking out at the village. Naruto could still feel it, a faint, distant thrum deep within his soul, the seal, the lock, his eternal duty as the warden. It was not a burden. It was a reminder, a constant, quiet testament to the price of the peace they now enjoyed. He placed his hand over Tenzo's, his anchor, his home. The greatest battle of his life had not been won with a Rasengan or a show of overwhelming power. It had been won with the stubborn, defiant, and unbreakable will to love, to connect, and to feel. The dawn that followed that long night was quiet, peaceful, and, most importantly, a dawn of their own choosing. Chapter 10 End.